Chapter 13:18. Charge. Kill all those who resist. For the great offshore king, for the establishment of the pirate kingdom, for wealth, for women, accompanied by the deafening battle cries, thousands of fully armed pirates swarmed forward and easily broke through the 2-meter-high wooden wall of the nobles in the countryside. They charged into the so-called castle and began a merciless slaughter. Any male who held a weapon or did not kneel down and surrender would be killed immediately. Those who knelt down to surrender were tied up by the pirates skillfully with ropes and gathered in an open space to be sold to the slave merchants. The fate of the women was even more miserable. Except for the noble girls who maintained their virginity and could be sold at a high price, the rest would be ravaged and ravaged in the next day or two until these vigorous beasts were satisfied before they were sold to the slave merchants again. No mercy. No mercy. There was no so-called sympathy. Since they landed, the pirates under the command of the offshore king had been burning, killing, and looting along the way. They neither accepted surrender nor loyalty, nor would they let go of any valuable towns. The way he established his ruling structure was very simple and crude. First, he killed the original rulers and destroyed their local foundation. Then, he infected his trusted subordinates and let them manage a certain area on his behalf. Lack of money? No problem. In the land they ruled in name, the pirate captains could unscrupulously attack and plunder towns and villages, kill the original owners of the land, demote the ordinary residents to slaves, force them to work the land day and night, or directly sell them all to the slave merchants in exchange for the initial bloody capital accumulation. With this kind of ruthless suppression, the people who dared to resist in the entire Taros area were almost all dead. Of course, the price was that the population rapidly decreased by more than half, and the remaining half were mostly demoted as serfs and became the private property of the new lords. However, there was a small group of lucky people who successfully gained the favor of the offshore king through flattery. Not only did they not lose their freedom, but they also became the rulers of this land, second only to the pirate captains. They were none other than the smugglers who provided the pirates with supplies, information, and intelligence. As a successful smuggler, Hasada was one of them. At the start, he had only relied on a small sampan to secretly transport a small number of weapons and armor to the pirate port, selling them at a high price to the pirates who needed them. Later on, with the stimulation of astonishing profits, the business grew bigger and bigger. In the end, there were even 12 ships of various sizes. While doing normal sea trade, they also expanded the scale of smuggling. In the end, he successfully seized the opportunity and became the new owner of this wooden castle and the surrounding land. He was a middle-aged man with a slightly plump figure. At this moment, he was standing on the blood-stained balcony, looking down at the numb expressions of the male captives in the small square and the heart-wrenching cries and screams of the women. He opened his mouth and asked without turning his head, "Honorable sir, when you rejected me back then, did you think that you would end up like this? Bah, if you want to kill, then kill. I will never submit to a lowly smuggler and a filthy pirate like you." An old man in black armor who was kneeling on the ground behind him spat fiercely. His hands were tied into the shape of fried dough twists. From a stubborn expression on his face and his unyielding gaze, it was easy to tell that he was the lord of this land, a professional warrior who had completely left his job. "Hey, old man, who are you calling filthy? Perhaps I should teach you what manners are." A pirate beside him suddenly pulled out his scimitar and walked forward with a ferocious smile. He did not hesitate in the slightest as he swung his sharp scimitar and directly chopped off the pirate's left ear. In an instant, crimson blood flowed down the pirate's neck and quickly soaked through the white shirt underneath his armor. "Oomph, coward, is this all the courage you have? Chopping off the ear of a captive who has no ability to fight back? Why not try chopping off my head?" The old man who was called Sir did not show any fear. Instead, he raised his head and mocked loudly. "Damn it, you think I don't dare? I'll chop off your head right now." The pirate was clearly enraged as he swung his scimitar towards the pirate's neck. But just as the scimitar was raised, Hasada spoke to stop him. "Wait. Don't kill him. He's purposely provoking you so that he can die early and be free. Damn it, I almost fell for this old man's trick. The pirate suddenly came to his senses and immediately pulled back the scimitar that was about to chop his neck. But he was clearly unwilling to let the other party go just like that. He lifted his boots covered in mud and blood and kicked the Lord's face, tried to use this method to vent the violence in his heart. In just a short while, the old man's face was covered in blood and his left cheek was swollen. He looked extremely miserable. Stop hitting him. If you hit him again, he'll die. In fact, I have a way to destroy his laughable self-esteem and make him willingly lie on the ground like a dog, clearing the remaining obstacles for us. The corner of Hasada's mouth rose slightly as a cruel smile appeared. Oh, what way? The pirate wiped the blood that had splattered on his face and asked. It's very simple. First of all, his dignity came from the fact that he was not only a nameless male, but also a lord. So, we have to destroy his pride as a man, which is to castrate him. Next, take him to the dungeon and force him to watch his daughter being raped day and night, until only a mixed-blood bastard is left. At that time, I want to see if he can still be as stubborn as he is now. When he said this, the smuggler did not hide the hatred and viciousness in his heart. Just as the saying goes, the more repressed you are, the crazier you will be when you vent, even reaching a perverted level. No, you bastard. I'll kill you. I'll kill you. When he heard that he was going to be castrated and had to watch his own daughter being raped by a group of filthy pirates day and night, leaving behind a bastard who would tarnish the family's bloodline and glory, the old man's eyes were suddenly filled with blood vessels. He was like a demon that had crawled out of hell. Even if someone was dragging him from behind, he still continued to struggle forward. His head kept banging on the ground as if he wanted to bang himself to death. Kill me? You didn't do it 20 years ago, so it's impossible for you to do it 20 years later. On the contrary, I have a debt that I need you to repay. Chapter 13:19. Some people said that behind every adult, there was often a painful and bitter past. The only difference was that some people chose to spend the rest of their lives in self-pity. They foolishly believed that this was their fate and accepted it without any resistance. But some people were the exact opposite. Not only did they silently bear the pain and bitterness, but they also did not forget to work hard. In the end, through practical actions, they changed their fate and even returned the pain to their enemies. Without a doubt, the smuggler Hasada was one of them. He would never forget how lowly, cowardly, and lowly he was 20 years ago. He did not even dare to say a word when his own father was hanged alive because his father poached in the forest when there was no food at home. But now, not only did he use the cruelest method to let the once high and mighty lord suffer physical and mental torture, but he also received the title of king of the coastal waters and officially became the true owner of this land. This kind of identity, as well as a huge change, unknowingly gave people the illusion of being powerful. Fortunately, Hasada had developed a vigilance due to his years of smuggling. After a short period of indulgence, he quickly regained his senses. He sent someone to invite the leader in charge of the pirates outside, a pirate captain disguised as a shapeshifter. At the same time, he was also one of the nobles conferred by the king of the coastal waters. Good evening, Your Excellency, Count. First of all, please allow me to express my gratitude for the help you provided. It was because of you and your brave subordinates that I was able to successfully defeat my enemies and take back my own territory. Saying this, the merchant raised a crystal glass filled with the best quality liquor. It had to be said that he was a person who paid attention to details. He even clearly investigated that pirates usually preferred strong liquor over soft alcohol. But unfortunately, this time, he clearly miscalculated. Shapeshifters actually did not like alcohol. If it was not to perfectly conceal their identity, they would definitely choose not to touch alcohol, because alcohol in their body would synthesize a strange chemical, causing the shapeshifters' self-control to decrease and unable to control their strong desire to eat. This also meant that if the alcohol intake reached a certain threshold, they would not be able to control themselves and would start a crazy killing spree. In the many records of the Dalent Expeditionary Force, similar things had happened many times. But after the shapeshifter used the corner of his eye to estimate the alcohol in the glass, he still chose to touch it with the other party. Then he raised his head and pretended to be forthright. After drinking all the liquor in the glass, he squeezed out a smile and replied, "No need to thank me. You have to understand that the reason I am here is not because of you, but because of the order of King of the Coastal Waters. Oh, I almost forgot. I should be calling him Your Majesty now. Of course, I am very clear about this point. But in any case, I must express my gratitude to you. This is the most basic courtesy I can show you. In addition, this is a small gift. Please accept it." Hazada casually opened a small wooden box that he had prepared. Instantly, the box under the light shone dazzlingly. "Oh!" The shapeshifter licked his lips and pretended to be greedy. "This is for me? Just to express your gratitude?" Hazada nodded without hesitation. "That's right. It was just to express his gratitude. Perhaps in your eyes, this is nothing more than suppressing an insignificant rebel, but in my heart, it is a rebirth. I finally went from a merchant with no social status to a noble, and even obtained a large territory. Ha ha! But your territory no longer has any young people. You have to know that no matter how large the land is, without enough labor, it is useless. It cannot produce food or other wealth." The shapeshifter reminded with a laugh. You are right. This is also the second issue I wish to discuss with you. I know that you will be going to a few other places to suppress rebels, and I just happen to need some healthy labor. If possible, I hope to buy some honest villagers. As for the price, I guarantee that you won't be disappointed. Hazada calmly offered a price. As a smuggler from the lowest level of society, he knew better than anyone how many people were needed to cultivate such a large piece of land. Only then could it be fully developed. "You want to buy slaves from me?" The shapeshifter pursed his lips and revealed a playful expression. It must be known that in this land that had been conquered by pirates, most of the new lords were more willing to package up and sell the resentful civilians to slave merchants, and then buy cheaper and more docile slaves from other places to fill the labor gap. Although it sounded like taking off one's pants to fart, in reality, it could greatly reduce the pressure of ruling, and at the same time, they could make a small profit from it. After all, the price of slaves was different from each other, especially the primitive natives of the islands in the south. Usually, only 20 or so old hands were needed to easily conquer and capture a tribe of hundreds of people. Because it was easy to obtain, the price was especially cheap. However, the disadvantage was that they had to be re-educated to learn farming, herding, and other skills. Coupled with the language barrier, although there was a sufficient amount of them, the sales were not good. On the contrary, the natives who had already entered civilized society were smart, spoke the same language, and grasped certain skills. However, they were full of a rebellious spirit and would always think of ways to escape when there was a chance. Since most people who bought slaves wanted people with professional skills who could communicate easily, the market for the latter was obviously much larger than the former, and the price was naturally more expensive. However, for the conquerors of the pirates, using the latter obviously had to bear the corresponding risks. Once an armed rebellion occurred, it would definitely cause the originally fragile ruling structure to collapse instantly. So, the king of the coastal waters took the advice of his beloved mistress and sold the population of the area, then bought the docile primitive slaves. With the powerful strength of the pirates, they created two classes once and for all. One was the warrior and noble class formed by the descendants of the pirates, responsible for external conquest, plundering, and suppressing internal rebellions. The other was the docile slave class, responsible for production, transportation, and providing the most basic physical labor. Once the two classes were completely stabilized, the pirate kingdom, and even the future pirate empire, would become incomparably stable. Chapter 1320. That's right. I want to buy a batch of slaves from your hands, not trash sent by slave merchants. You should be very clear that the primitive people from the hot islands in the south, other than being cheap and docile, have no other advantages. I want a group of people who can immediately put into production not idiots who need to spend a lot of time and effort to teach them how to farm. Hazada obviously knew what the primitive people on the island were like, and did not hide his disdain and disgust. Of course, there was a more important reason that he did not mention. If his territory was filled with such weak trash, how could he form a qualified private army? As a smuggler who was always in danger of being hanged, he knew the importance of a strong military force to a feudal lord. Pirate captains who were conferred titles could naturally choose a group of people from their fierce subordinates to build their own personal guards and private army to protect their rights and dignity from being violated. As for the slaves in charge of work in the territory, the more docile they were, the better. They did not need to know too much, nor did they need to have much experience. They just needed to be bound to the land. But for merchants like Hazada, who were promoted because of providing all kinds of services to the pirates, it was quite difficult to build a qualified private army. If they did not have a decent private army, how could the merchants maintain an advantage in the future internal competition? Did they completely rely on business to earn a large amount of wealth and continue to pay tribute to the powerful pirate captains in exchange for their protection? Any merchant with a bit of common sense would not think that this was a good idea. Because if they only had a large amount of wealth, but did not have the strength to match it, the outcome would be a tragedy. These people who had not even gotten rid of their original pirate identity, and their minds were still filled with thoughts of burning, killing, and plundering. They would use any means to plunder the property of the merchants who were in a weak position, and would not consider that both sides were nobles of the kingdom. To be precise, no pirate would treat the merchants as their own people. On the contrary, although the merchants helped to sell the stolen goods and brought back the most urgently needed supplies, in their eyes, they were a group of vampires. Towards rich merchants, the pirate's attitude was often envy with a trace of jealousy and hatred. Thus, even if it was for the sake of his descendants and the family he had built with great difficulty, Hazada would use everything he had to obtain his own armed forces. And the source of this armed force was precisely the source of slaves. It was obviously too expensive to buy trained warriors directly from the slave merchants. Moreover, it was very difficult to control them. If things went wrong, they might be killed by the slave warriors who rebelled before the pirates could even make a move. After much consideration, he finally set his sights on the local residents. As long as there was enough nutrition and strict training, the people living on this land could basically become qualified soldiers. Shapeshifters had a certain degree of ability to sense emotions and thoughts. It was easy for them to see through the desire hidden in the merchant's heart. He gently put down the empty cup in his hand and asked in a meaningful tone, "In addition to ordinary slaves, do you also want an officer who is familiar with military training methods?" I don't know what you're talking about." Hearing the word officer, Hasada's forehead was covered with sweat. He looked very nervous and guilty. "Don't try to deny it. I can see that you want to get out of this awkward situation." The foundation of nobles was land, and land was linked to population. Generally speaking, the more people controlled in the territory, the more powerful the nobles were, and they had the ability to recruit and raise more private armies. But our new kingdom is different. The nobles here aren't closely connected to the land. Most of the nobles who are conferred titles don't even realize what a qualified noble should look like. They also don't understand how powerful the military force they possess is. But you realized it and try to make up for the gap in some way. Shapeshifters watched the merchant's flickering eyes and calmly expose the other's inner thoughts. This was because he saw a possibility from Hazada. It was a shortcut that could allow the island kingdom to quickly grow stronger. It had been a long time since the start of the war. Even if the news was sealed, the rulers of the surrounding areas should know that they had just changed a new neighbor. Moreover, this neighbor was cruel and greedy, and could attack every port city along the coast at any time. This also meant that with the end of the internal resistance, those who felt threatened or fearful would soon unite and launch an encirclement and suppression of a new regime. After this wave, they could truly stand firm. As for whether they could survive, well, Shapeshifter suddenly felt that he was overthinking. With the support of the Expeditionary Army Supreme Commander, How could he not even withstand this little test? Not to mention, the offshore king still had a few interesting things in his hands. My Lord Count, I admit that I did have some thoughts about it. But please don't misunderstand. I absolutely didn't mean to betray His Majesty or the kingdom. I just wanted to better integrate. Hasato was obviously afraid and carefully explained himself. He wasn't sure if the man in front of him, who was highly regarded by the offshore king, would do something extreme. After all, pirates who had been engaged in burning, killing, and looting for a long time often had varying degrees of neuroticism. They might be talking and laughing one second, but the next second, they would pull out a weapon and cut off your head. Misunderstanding? No, I didn't misunderstand. On the contrary, I am full of appreciation for your actions. If all the nobles who were conferred titles had a sense of worry like you, it would be great. Shapeshifters reached out a hand and patted the merchant's shoulder. Hasato was stunned for a moment and asked in an uncertain tone, "Then you agree to my request?" "Not only agree, I will also give you additional support. But the premise is that you must agree to one of my conditions." "What condition?" "Swear allegiance to me and the power behind me." "The power behind you?" "Yes. You don't think that someone like me will swear allegiance to the offshore king, do you?" "No, he's just a chess piece under our control. As long as you swear allegiance, not only will I help you build a powerful private army, but I will also make you the leader of the merchants. One day, you will even replace the offshore king and become the master of this land." Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1321. Interesting. The shapeshifters under your command actually established a secret alliance independent of the offshore king's ruling system through coercion and bribery. Tell me, is there a need for this? The boy held the information that the shapeshifter leader had personally sent over with a playful expression on his face. The offshore king and the huge pirate force under him were only one of the many chess pieces he used to push the world into chaos. They were not even the most important one, because he had always been very clear about who the real enemy he needed to face was. It was not the secular regime, but the 13 traitors hidden behind the secular regime and the guy who provided them with the information. The turmoil and chaos created now were all probing bait. It was not worth wasting too much time and energy. It did not matter even if they were all eliminated. Of course, before they were eliminated, they had to be fully utilized. The shapeshifter leader responded with a smile. "Yes, I think it is necessary. This is your first time leading the expeditionary army, so you don't understand our way of thinking. In the eyes of us, shapeshifters, every person we support must have at least 2 different factions within them. This way, if anyone tries to escape control or betrays the expeditionary army, my people can launch a big purge in the shortest time and get everything back on track. The offshore king and his pirates are now chess pieces that cannot be ignored. I think it is necessary to have insurance." "So you chose the smugglers? A group of special groups that are very difficult to integrate into the pirates?" the boy asked with interest. The shapeshifter leader nodded seriously. "That's right. Because from a traditional point of view, pirates and merchants should be opposed to each other. The former's mind is filled with the greed of reaping without sowing. Compared to getting what they want through trade, they are more willing to use violence to rob. The latter, on the other hand, was the exact opposite. They would only resort to violence when a deal could not be reached. This fundamental difference determined that most pirates would not accept smugglers. Similarly, smugglers would not believe that pirates would really abandon their previous bad habits and abide by the rules like real nobles. Both sides did not trust each other from the beginning and formed an invisible barrier. My people only used this point to pull the merchants away from the offshore king and make them swear loyalty to the expeditionary army. Also, don't worry, I guarantee that these merchants will be the same as the offshore king. They won't know our true identity. By the time the mystery was revealed, it would be too late for them to betray him. This world will not accept a group of people who once worked for the invaders. They have no other choice but to continue on their planned path." You're right. Contradictions were everywhere in this world, and even in the entire universe. As long as he made good use of it, even close friends would have cracks in them, and they would eventually fall out and become enemies. But you have to understand that the Expeditionary Army's current focus isn't on those dispensable chess pieces, but the abnormal energy nodes that have appeared recently. As the boy spoke, he tossed a black slate to the man. As a highly developed magic civilization, the Dalent people had long abandoned the extremely backward method of recording information, such as pen and paper. Instead, they had invented an astonishing information storage device. Through the regular changes caused by the energy coming into contact with certain materials, this black stone slab would display all kinds of contents. Sometimes it would be complex words, pictures, and sometimes it would be a three-dimensional projection. As soon as the shapeshifter leader received the black slate, his expression changed drastically. Just as you thought, this is a magic ritual whose use is temporarily unknown, but its power is extremely powerful. It almost drains all the energy in the surroundings, which is why it was observed by our spellcasters. How is it? Based on your experience, what do you think our enemies are planning to do? The boy's lips curled up slightly, revealing an excited and expectant expression. Sorry, based on the information I've obtained so far, I can only roughly judge that they seem to want to awaken something. Look at these runes. According to the records, it's a unique combination of runes in this world, the shapeshifter leader explained quickly. As a leader, the biggest difference between him and those of the same kind who only knew how to rely on their innate talents was that he was a senior spellcaster who had gone through in-depth studies and graduated from school with excellent results. He even had the title of a mentor. It should be known that even on planet Mocha, where magic was highly developed, there were no more than 50,000 people who had the title of mentor. They were the standard geniuses of 1 in 10,000. Even if he wasn't in charge of the shapeshifters, he could still find a place for himself in the spellcasters team. Obviously, the boy was quite satisfied with the ability and knowledge displayed by this subordinate of his. He rubbed his chin with one hand and said in an orderly manner, "The Akram Talisman. That's what the spellcasters of this world call it. Generally speaking, those who can master this complex set of runes have more than 90% of the spellcasters in the Expeditionary Army. So in my eyes, this is a fairly obvious signal. Those 13 betrayers can't sit still anymore." "You mean?" The shapeshifter leader's eyes seemed to have realized something, and a frightening light shone from his eyes. "Isn't this obvious enough? They're awakening their comrades who have fallen into a deep sleep. After all, they've wiped out an entire expeditionary army last time. How could they be unharmed?" The boy straightforwardly expressed his guess. Battles, or rather, wars, could never be truly zero casualties, especially when the total number of combatants on both sides exceeded 100,000. Even if the enemy was unprepared for a sudden attack, the casualties would not be less than a third, or even half. As for the battles between the strong, even if they were lucky enough to survive, they would most likely be severely injured. This also explained why those self-proclaimed kings rarely appeared in the public eye for the past 12 years. They relied on a few followers to maintain the most basic order, ensuring that the world would not fall into endless darkness and chaos while licking its wounds. Damn it! Then shouldn't we hurry up and find a way to destroy it? Destroy? No. Why should we destroy it? You have to understand that many times, enemies who hide in the dark are the most difficult to deal with. So not only will I not destroy it, I'll even add fuel to the fire. If I remember correctly, there are already many magic curses in the strengthening class. It's time for this world to taste pain, despair, and death. Chapter 1322. When a terrifying curse that could infect a city in just 2 to 3 days and kill more than 90% of the city's population within 10 days suddenly broke out on a large scale, what would the consequences be? Just take a look at this world and you'll know. In less than 2 months, 60% of the life on this planet that was originally full of life had been wiped out. It should be noted that this was not just 60% of the population, but all life, including plants, animals, those that flew in the sky, and those that swam in the water. Such a deranged act had reduced half of the planet into a ghost town. Other than the living corpses that were still wandering around, there was not even a mosquito to be seen. Even the trees had been transformed into monsters that relied on negative energy to survive. As for the places that had not been infected by the curse, they had all entered the highest state of alert. Without exception, the rulers had all ordered the borders to be closed and sealed. Once outsiders were discovered, regardless of whether they were nobles or merchants, they would all be killed without mercy. They had even taken the initiative to set fire to the trees and withered grass in the forests and wilderness. However, anyone who had personally witnessed this hellish scene knew very well that they were facing a huge crisis. It did not need to be much. As long as a person, animal, or plant carrying the curse crossed the quarantine zone, the destruction and death would continue to advance until the entire world was devoured. Standing in the center of the city that had been completely turned into a ghost town, the king, who was wearing silver-white armor and exuding a shocking chill from head to toe, stared at the corpses that were scattered all over the ground. After a few minutes, he asked in an uncertain tone, "If I remember correctly, the last time the invaders came, they didn't seem to mention that they had such a terrifying thing, right?" "No." The beautiful woman wearing a green silk robe beside him shook her head gently. "This is a terrifying curse. With the strength of the souls of ordinary people, it's impossible for them to resist it. What's more terrifying is that as the number of deaths increases, the source of this curse is also becoming stronger and stronger. Right now, it's almost beyond the scope of our abilities." "You mean it can't be eradicated?" Another old man with wrinkled skin frowned. "It's not that it can't be eradicated, but it's very difficult. I have to say that the invaders this time are obviously more brutal, cunning, and ruthless than the last time. They want to complete an unprecedented conquest by wiping out all life in this world. He even used this method to tell us that what he needed was never people, but resources." When the beautiful woman said this, her face was filled with disgust and hatred. As a spellcaster who was proficient in nature and life magic, she undoubtedly felt the tremendous suffering that the entire world was enduring. Moreover, as the death zone continued to expand, the life energy would become thinner and thinner. When most of the life forms were wiped out, she would lose her power and become a complete mortal. "Damn it, what should we do now? Do you want to risk being exposed and continue to awaken the remaining companions?" The old man gripped the staff made of unknown vines tightly, his eyes emitting a terrifying green light. "Of course. Do you think we still have a choice? The commander of the invaders has already declared war on us. Either we fight back and defeat them again, or we watch as our world is destroyed. I don't want to struggle at death's door just to survive. I'd rather die in a glorious battle than live like that. Besides, it's not like we have no chance of winning." The king, in silver armor, responded meaningfully. "I agree. It's time to wake everyone up and start this final war." Seconded. "We have no way out." In an instant, everyone present expressed their opinions without hesitation. Under the great threat from the enemy, intelligent life forms were often the easiest to reach a consensus. At the same time, it was also the easiest to give up on personal grudges and personal interests and gather together to fight for survival. Soon, these kings left the dead city through teleportation and arrived at the top of a barren mountain. Looking at the magic circle that was completely covered by weeds, the woman could not help but sigh slightly. She muttered to herself in a voice that only she could hear, "I'm sorry, old friend. It's not that I want to disturb you, but this world needs your return now. Come on, wake up, we need you." As soon as she finished speaking, the runes that were covered by weeds flickered with a dazzling light. The next second, boom, the entire barren mountain exploded with a loud bang. The tremors that shook the mountain could be felt even from hundreds of kilometers away. At the same time, the ground that was tightly connected to the mountain cracked open a bottomless hole. Slowly, a naked man with a heavy aura crawled out from the crack. He glanced at the familiar faces around him and immediately complained impatiently. "Bastard, didn't I say that it's best not to wake me up before I recover? You have to know that in another 2 years, I'll be able to completely merge with the ground under my feet and even use the power of the ground to make the enemy suffer. I'm sorry to inform you that the invaders are here again. This time, they've used some methods that we didn't expect. Use your ability to feel the pain that the entire world is suffering, then you'll understand what I mean. The woman did not explain much, because she knew that with the power that the man had, as long as he felt a little, he would immediately understand the terrible situation at hand. Oh, no, no, no. What are these lunatics trying to do? Release a terrifying curse and destroy all life in this world? The man's eyes widened, his face full of disbelief. The enemy wants to tell us that they don't care about the life in this world. They only want resources and to take revenge for the decision that we made before. So, they don't want to conquer the world. Instead, they want to destroy it? You can say that. We have to think of a way to stop the curse from spreading. Otherwise, even if we succeed in defeating the invaders, it'll be meaningless. Such a powerful curse may require all of us to work together to defeat it. Go and wake up the rest of our companions, especially the prophet who made the accurate prophecies. I hope that this time he will be able to bring us a glorious victory like before. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1323. As the 13 kings were awakened one by one, the spellcasters in the Dalent Expeditionary Army accurately captured the abnormal energy waves, each stronger than the last. Finally, the leader in charge of coordinating and controlling the spellcasters, a male Darantion, appeared in the central tower of the magic fortress. He didn't waste any time and directly displayed a map of the continent supported by an illusion. He sneered, "Honorable Commander, I think we've caught the enemy's tail." "Oh, where'll they go next?" The boy raised his head and looked at the huge map. His eyes stared straight at a point, as if he already had an answer in his heart. Of course it's here, the core of the curse that's causing this world to enter the final countdown to its death. They must save the remaining lives at all costs and make sure the entire planet doesn't die. The spellcaster leader raised a slender finger and lightly tapped on the illusion. This point was none other than the first port city that was massacred by the curse, the city-state of Archie. However, the city-state of Archie had already given birth to a large number of twisted monsters under the effects of the terrifying curse. The strongest few of them were so powerful that even the expeditionary army had to be careful against them. Otherwise, they would suffer heavy losses. Hee, the place where the dream began? That sounds really exciting, doesn't it? The boy's lips curled into a meaningful smile. The spellcaster leader nodded with interest. There's nothing we can do about it. We can let this world die and then harvest and plunder as much resources as we want, but they can't. They have to make sure this planet is full of life. Otherwise, what's the point of winning? Yes, before reaching a certain level, no intelligent life can survive independently. They need to communicate and learn from each other. Otherwise, they will slowly walk into a dead end, unable to see the path to a higher level. Whatever, there's no point in talking about this now. Tell me, what's the best solution you've come up with? The boy didn't know why, but he immediately changed the topic to the upcoming battle. He was very clear that the source of the curse was actually a signal to start the battle, forcing the opponent to come to the front. Therefore, not only did he know this was the final battle, but so did the opponent. Therefore, in this battle, both sides would use all their trump cards and do their best to destroy the opponent. There was no chance of luck. Very simple. Now that we know the enemy's location, the best solution we can come up with is to use long-range magic attacks. Earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, summon meteorites. In short, all the large-scale catastrophic spells that could be used now. He believed that in such a harsh environment, the other party would not be able to concentrate no matter what he did. Most importantly, as far as I know, as more and more lives die from the curse, the source of the curse has become so powerful that it's terrifying. Even when facing it, the enemy will have to do their best. The spellcaster leader did not hide his gloating mood at all, and directly expressed it clearly on his face. In the beginning, he firmly opposed the use of the contagious curse, believing that it would destroy a lot of valuable resources and make the whole world boring. But when the bell for the final battle was about to ring, he immediately changed his attitude. After all, based on the data obtained from the observations, the power possessed by the 13 kings had obviously exceeded the records in the database. Needless to say, The other party had most likely digested and absorbed all the benefits obtained from the previous expeditionary army. Once they fought, it would definitely be a bitter battle. Any suspicious method to weaken the opponent would become a good method at this moment. You mean, we are only responsible for disrupting them, and then waiting for them to be killed by the source of the curse? The boy's expression suddenly became a little strange. That's right. Using the easiest way to solve problems, isn't that your code of conduct? The spellcaster leader replied, as if it was a matter of course. But unfortunately, the boy shook his head and denied it. No, I think you've misunderstood something. Indeed, I like to use the easiest way to solve problems, but that doesn't mean that I don't like to face challenges, especially when facing a group of people with interesting trump cards. Please use your brain and think about it carefully. What did they rely on to destroy the previous expeditionary army? What makes you think that we won't retaliate in a short time? Strength? Obviously not. My guess is that one of them has foreseen the future, or at least a fragment of the future. Foresee the future? Do you really believe that there is magic that can foresee the future? The male Dalent spell caster widened his eyes and fell into a state of sluggishness. It must be noted that in the complex and ever-changing magic system, although there were spells that claimed to be able to foresee the future, the reality was not at all as omniscient as people imagined. Most of the time, the effects produced by foreseeing spells were only positive or negative answers within the range of priority questions. For example, if a person were to foresee his own future, he could ask if his life would be in danger in an adventure a few months later. Then, he could ask if the danger would come from the outside or from within. In this way, he would know whether he needed to guard against external enemies or his teammates. As for who he needed to guard against, it was impossible to get a definite answer. All in all, rather than foreseeing the future, it was better to use some certain clues to analyze with one's own wisdom and finally come up with a judgment that was relatively close to the truth. But interestingly, on planet Mocha, where the magic civilization was highly developed, there had never been a true prophet. Therefore, the Dalent spellcaster was not very interested in language magic. Only a very small number of people would be interested in the illusory fate and invest a lot of time and energy to study it. Just because you haven't seen it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. I'm not too sure whether there is a true prophet among the enemies, but all kinds of facts are in front of me, and I can't help but believe it. Well, go and prepare. This time, what we need to do is not only to interfere, but to do our best to eliminate the last enemy and ensure that there will be no resistance in this world in the future. After saying that, the boy waved his hand, indicating that the male Dalent spellcaster could leave. As you wish. I will let the spellcasters enter a state of combat readiness and give the enemy the heaviest blow at any time. The latter bowed deeply before turning around and disappearing through the door. Chapter 1324. The city-state of Archie, the city that was once called the Pearl of the Sea, was now distorted by the power of the curse. The sky was no longer the usual azure blue. Instead, it was a gray color mixed with darkness. The surrounding air was also filled with a humid and heavy fog. Any normal person would completely lose their mind if they stayed in the fog for a few minutes, turning into a crazy and aggressive monster. What was even more terrifying was that this power didn't just affect living beings. Even the dead weren't spared. All the living beings that died around the city were revived in another form, especially the corpses of humans and animals. They were all wandering around aimlessly. Even in the center of the city, there was a terrifying aura that made people tremble. Strange, horrifying. Even though the 13 kings had seen a lot, they couldn't help but be shocked by the scene in front of them. Unbelievable. This is the curse formed by the resentment and souls of thousands of dead people. The woman, emitting a powerful aura of life, casually tore apart 2 living corpses that tried to attack her as she frowned. If there was one person present who could feel the pain that this land was suffering the most, it would definitely be her. It seems like the situation is more serious than we thought. Why didn't you wake us up earlier? Why did you have to wait for things to get out of hand? Another woman whose face was as pale as a corpse asked with a serious expression. Too fast. In the beginning, the invaders were only spreading in the city and didn't spread much. Then they sent people out to hunt down the adventurer teams that were chasing after Dalen's people. The forces behind them successfully diverted our attention. It was already half a month ago when we found out that the entire world was collapsing under the power of the curse. The person emitting a chilling aura explained. As one of the people who saw it all happen, he understood why his companions were so nervous and angry. It had to be known that this wasn't a plague or a virus that couldn't be cured with an antidote. It was a collision of soul powers. If the soul of the living being that came into contact with the curse was powerful enough, like the kings in front of him, nothing would happen. However, if the soul wasn't powerful enough, the curse would instantly latch onto the soul and enter an incubation period. It would slowly erode the soul in the dark until the soul was weakened to a certain extent. Only then would the curse suddenly erupt. Therefore, as long as the soul wasn't strong enough, it would never be able to escape from the curse, unless the essence of the curse was defeated, which was the essence of the curse formed by the soul of the first person that died from the curse. The result would be death. No matter how powerful the magic or item was, it could only slow down the process and not reverse it. What was even more terrifying was that as the number of deaths increased, the source of the curse would become stronger and stronger. When 90% of the planet was destroyed, it would become the ruler and god of this world. Unless the planet was destroyed, nothing could destroy the source of the curse. Damn it, looks like we still don't know enough. The knowledge and technology that the invaders brought with them didn't mention such a terrifying thing. The short man, who had been hiding under a gray cloak, shook his head in frustration. By the way, why isn't the prophet here yet? The prophet said that he has more important things to deal with. The mysterious man whose face was covered in unknown paint replied. More important things? Could it be that there's something more important than defeating the invaders and saving our world? Also, didn't he tell us the result of this war? Sorry, he didn't say anything. And judging from his reaction, I don't think the result will be good. You know, I've never seen him so nervous before. It's as if some undefeatable enemy is coming. The prophet has always been timid. He wouldn't appear in a place that he thinks is dangerous. Remember the last time? Everything was as easy as expected, but he wasn't willing to do anything. He wasn't even willing to join us and let his name be known by the world. No, I have a bad feeling about this. The prophet must have foreseen something. Just as these people were arguing about the prophet's strange behavior, a burning fireball suddenly streaked across the sky and tore through the dark clouds. The next second, boom, this gigantic meteorite created by magic smashed into the building less than 100 meters away from them and let out a deafening roar. At the same time, a terrifying shockwave and heat wave quickly engulfed everything in the surroundings. The ground trembled under the violent impact, and a crack appeared in the middle. The polluted black seawater outside the port quickly poured in, directly submerging more than half of the city. Because it came too quickly and too suddenly, none of the 13 kings were prepared. As a result, it took them quite a while to climb out of the terrifying seawater with their own unique strength. However, some of them stayed in the air, some stepped on the water, and some directly caused a huge rock to rise from under their feet. This is a magic attack. The invaders know that we're here. The man in silver armor and exuding a bone-chilling aura raised his staff and completely wrapped himself in ice. The woman standing not far away shook off the water stains on her robe and shrugged nonchalantly. Isn't this to be expected? However, our biggest problem right now isn't the enemy's AoE spells, but the terrifying monsters born from the curse. Look, they're here. As the last word left her mouth, a huge black shadow suddenly enveloped an area of hundreds of square meters. Be careful. It's testing our souls. Don't be careless at all. Otherwise, the terrifying curse will entangle you. The muscular man standing on the huge rock warned loudly. I don't need you to say that. I can already feel it. This bone-chilling cold, resentment, hatred, and despair. It's making my whole body shiver, as if my soul is about to be frozen. Could this be the essence of the curse that we're looking for? The woman's beautiful face revealed a nervous expression. No, It's obviously not strong enough. According to the number of lives that have been destroyed in this world, the true source of the curse should be able to make us feel death the moment it appears. Before the man could finish speaking, a black unknown substance instantly wrapped around his right foot. Chapter 1325. Not good. It's got me. Don't move. Don't move. The twisted monster created by the curse shouldn't be able to tell the difference between the living and the dead. The more you struggle, the stronger its attack will be. But it's tried to invade my soul. Damn it. I said don't move. You'll attract the rest of the monsters here. Easy for you to say. If I don't resist, I'll be assimilated in a few minutes. In just a few words of argument, the black unknown substance quickly spread throughout her body, and at the same time, there was a low and suppressed sound in the air. Whoa, accompanied by the howl of an unknown wind or some other monster. A twisted and sickly face appeared in the sky above. It was so huge that it enveloped the entire city, and it emitted an aura of pain, despair, and misfortune. Oh no, we've been discovered. Quick, beat this monster back. Move immediately. The woman was clearly aware of how bad the situation was. She decisively released a huge amount of life energy and launched an attack on the unknown black substance. In the blink of an eye, the green energy expelled the black substance, and at the same time, the huge face in the sky showed a painful expression. There was no doubt that although the life force did not cause any real damage, it still made it feel uncomfortable. As a special existence without subjective consciousness, the source of the curse obviously did not have the ability to think and only followed its instincts. When it was attacked, it would naturally mobilize the corresponding power to counterattack. After the target broke free for less than a second, the monsters in the center of the city, emitting a terrifying aura, finally rushed out. A giant that was piled up by countless corpses, like a small mountain, a huge spiritual body filled with all kinds of negative emotions. There were also two gray air masses that were faintly discernible and had no shape at all. Especially the last two air masses. Although they were not as scary as the first two, the 13 Kings' expressions changed drastically, and some even showed fear in their eyes. What is that thing? The man who was emitting a bone-chilling aura asked with a slightly trembling voice. Don't ask me. I don't know, but I can tell you that it's best if you don't touch it. Otherwise, you'll be in big trouble. The mysterious man whose face was covered in paint warned with a serious expression. This was because all the magical energy around the two gray clouds had been distorted, forming layers of circular isolation belts. This also meant that ordinary magic and weapons would not be able to cause any real damage. After all, against a gaseous life form, no matter how sharp the sword was, it would still pass through without exception. It would not be like cutting through flesh and blood, causing the opponent to be heavily injured and bleeding. Similarly, magic spells that were constructed from energy would be greatly weakened or even completely dissipated in the face of the ring-shaped isolation belts. It was conceivable that if these two air masses enveloped someone, that person would instantly lose their strength and become a fish on the chopping block. Nervous. Unprecedented nervousness. When the distorted monsters approached step by step, and the fierce battle was about to break out, the surrounding air suddenly became distorted. In the next second, a teleportation door suddenly opened out of thin air, and a small figure walked out from it. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy that you're able to come to this stage that I've personally built. The boy slowly walked out of the darkness, smiling as he bowed slightly. For some reason, the source of the curse and the distorted monsters seemed to have completely ignored him. Even though they were less than 2 to 3 meters apart, they did not show any signs of changing their target. Who are you? The beautiful woman who used life energy narrowed her eyes, her gaze filled with vigilance and scrutiny. It was obvious that she did not realize that the little fellow standing in front of her was actually the highest commander of this expedition, an executioner who personally gave the order to destroy all life in this world. Who am I? Ha ha! You don't even know who your enemy is? How strange. What right do you have to defeat the previous expeditionary army? And what right do you have to expose yourselves in front of me? The boy laughed out loud as he tried to probe. You're an invader? No, no, you're not from the Dalent. The woman was sure at first, but then she shook her head. She was obviously confused, unable to confirm the identity of the other party. That's right. I'm indeed not from the Dalent, but I'm the highest commander of an expedition. The doomsday scene that you see in front of you is planned by me. As for the purpose, of course, it's to force you out of your hiding place. When he said this, the boy's pupils flashed with a strange light, as if he was inspecting the prey that fell into a trap. Needless to say, he enjoyed this kind of game before the final battle began, playing with the sensitive nerves of the enemy. Are you crazy? What good will destroying this world do you? Didn't you come here to conquer it? The man with bright pain on his face stood out and questioned sternly. The boy stretched out a finger and shook it gently. No, no, no. You seem to have misunderstood something. Indeed, our goal is to conquer one world after another. But don't forget that conquering is only a means, not the final goal. Our final goal is to plunder resources from each world to support the brilliant magic civilization on the mother planet. Therefore, resources are the most important, and life is only an accessory of resources. When we confirm that the resistance of a world's life is too strong, it will create countless troubles for our future rule. Naturally, we can choose to completely destroy it once and for all. Okay, I've finished answering your questions. Now it's your turn to answer my question. Tell me, how did you defeat an expeditionary army last time? Who gave you the courage and guts to do this? As soon as he finished speaking, the 13 kings present showed a strange expression, and a few of them even kept exchanging glances. After a full minute, the guy who was emitting a bone-chilling cold suddenly crushed the mirror-like shield in his hand and shouted, "Freeze!" "Huh!" In an instant, countless ice shards wrapped the boy from top to bottom at a speed that couldn't be tracked by the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, he and his surroundings were covered by white ice, which was strong enough to withstand the bombardment of powerful magic. Chapter 1326. It's a success. The woman stared at the bone-chilling ice not far away, as if she could not believe her eyes. Because everything had happened too quickly and too suddenly, she still hadn't reacted. However, the man in silver armor did not show the slightest bit of joy. He maintained a high level of nervousness and shook his head directly. Don't ask me, I don't know. Even though the mirror shield is a powerful magical tool that I spent a lot of time and effort to create, if it's really used against the highest commander of the invaders, I'm afraid it'll be the deciding factor. You mean, he can break free from this ice? Before the other person could finish his words, the surface of the originally sparkling and translucent ice suddenly cracked like a spider web. In less than 2 or 3 seconds, the solid ice shattered with a bang. At the same time, the twisted giant that was pieced together by countless corpses seemed to have suffered a few blows. It immediately rushed in with large strides, swinging its stinking and rotting arm down viciously. Boom! Accompanied by loud noises and tremors, the fierce, chaotic battle finally began. The boy who had just broken free shook off the ice shards that remained on his body and praised with a smile, "An ultra-low temperature that's infinitely close to absolute zero? One amazing magical tool. Unfortunately, as long as it's not true absolute zero, it won't be able to trap me. Now it's time for all of this to come to an end. You know, I'm still waiting to find the prophet who has the ability to predict the future from your memories." "What? How do you know about the prophet?" The burly man who had wrapped himself in a large piece of rock punched the arm of the corpse giant, his eyes filled with shock. "It's very simple. I can read the superficial thoughts in your minds. You can understand it as a kind of mind-reading magic, or you can think of it as a special ability that's between magic and non-magic. In short, since I was 6 years old, this ability has been very powerful, but this is the first time I've used it." As he spoke, the boy raised his hand and lightly snapped his fingers twice. "Ha!" Instantly, a formless energy suddenly exploded in the crowd. Everyone, including the 13 kings, seemed to have felt some kind of tremor in their souls, so much so that they lost control of their bodies for a short moment. It was as if time had stopped. By the time they reacted, the corpse giant was already in front of them, almost trampling them into meat patties. Fortunately, these self-proclaimed kings had many life-saving methods. In the blink of an eye, they escaped from the giant's attack range. It must be known that this kind of twisted monster that was condensed from countless corpses had a strong vitality that far exceeded the imagination of ordinary people. It was almost impossible to kill it in an instant. Moreover, among the four monsters, the corpse giant, which had a physical body, was actually the least dangerous one. On the contrary, the two motionless air masses were the real threat. When they reached a safe place, the frightened woman immediately asked loudly, "What kind of power was that? It can actually affect our hearts and minds. This is the purest form of spiritual power, something completely opposite to energy and matter. It was invisible. In fact, it didn't even exist in the eyes of most people. However, it can change a lot of things, making some impossible things become reality." As the boy spoke, he slowly rose into the air, only a step away from the source of the curse. Without any hesitation, he directly reached his right hand into the face, touching the soul of the first life that died from the curse, and injected something indescribable into it. "No, stop him. He wants to." The man with bright paint on his face obviously sensed something and shouted a warning to his companions. However, halfway through his words, the source of the curse suddenly began to release a kind of clearly inaudible but piercing sound wave. Everyone who heard this sound wave, except for the boy, felt that their souls began to tremble violently without control. It was as if these souls were about to break free from the shackles of the body and enter a state of freedom. Admiring the frightened, trembling, and desperate expressions below, the boy pursed his lips and revealed a contemptuous smile. "This is the power of the so-called 13 kings. You disappoint me too much. It seems that the destruction of the previous expeditionary army wasn't due to you at all. Now, I'll give you a chance to kneel down and become a servant again. Whoever tells me the name and whereabouts of the prophet first, I'll pardon all the crimes he has committed in the past." Monster. You're a monster through and through." The man in silver armor bit down hard on his lower lip and squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. "Ha ha. Thank you very much for your compliment. Believe me, you're not the first person to say this, and you won't be the last. You know, even among the Dalent people, whose magic civilization is highly developed, I'm a very special existence. I can feel that those Dalent people are afraid of me, and even wary of me. But what does it matter? I'm also using them. Maybe one day, I'll destroy their home planet like I destroyed this planet. The nature of the universe is the law of the jungle. It's the same between species, between civilizations, and even between celestial bodies. It's always the strong devouring the weak. So don't blame anyone. Blame yourself for being too weak. Weakness is the original sin. From the moment the Dalent people discovered this world, your fate is no longer in your own hands. Okay, after saying so much, you should have thought it through. Now, who's willing to be the first to kneel down and lick my boots? You have to know that for conquered people like you, this is a rare honor. For the first time, the boy didn't hide the dark side in his heart like before. Instead, he completely unleashed it. The most terrifying thing was that, during this process, he seemed to have obtained some kind of strong satisfaction, as if this was how it should be. Play, thrill, humiliation, then trample on the enemy. No matter how much hatred the enemy had, they would never be able to change the established fact. Chapter 13:27. Facing a monster that was ridiculing them and looking at them as if they were living creatures, the 13 kings did not look too good. Some of them even began to recall the scene when they first cooperated with the expeditionary army. At least at that time, they could still receive a certain degree of courtesy. At least it was not like now, where they had to give up all their dignity and self-respect. Only by kneeling could they have a chance of survival. Silence. Everyone present began to think about the future. They were considering whether to use their lives to defend their dignity or to exchange their dignity for life. It must be known that ever since they defeated the last expeditionary army, they had fallen into the illusion that they were very powerful for a long time. Whether it was their hearts or their personalities, they had become more and more arrogant. Now that they had to lower their heads and become someone else's servant, it was difficult for them to change their rationality and emotions. The boy undoubtedly noticed this. He laughed and teased without hiding it. "Why are you all silent? Didn't you hear the conditions I just mentioned? Or do you think you can delay indefinitely like this?" As soon as he finished speaking, he gently waved his left hand. The next second, the black, unknown substance that had disappeared emerged from the darkness once again. It was like boiling water that was constantly boiling. At the same time, two air masses that had not moved since the beginning quietly approached the crowd at a speed that could not be seen by the naked eye. They distorted all the magical energy in the surroundings, causing it to become extremely unstable in such an environment. Not to mention casting a powerful spell, even the slightest bit of energy would cause unpredictable and serious consequences. Needless to say, this kind of undisguised action was definitely a blatant threat. "Bastard, I'll fight it out with you." The most muscular guy suddenly inserted his hands into the ground and roared with a flushed face, "Feel the wrath of the earth. Erupt." Boom! Accompanied by a deafening sound, the area within a radius of a few hundred meters suddenly bulged up. Then, a large number of boulders that weighed several tons splashed out. They were like meteors that came from below, smashing towards the boy's position. And behind the boulders, there was a large amount of boiling red magma. It was obvious that he had torn the crust of the area under his feet, or rather, he had torn a crack in the earth. Under the immense pressure, the magma gushed out like a thunderbolt, releasing an astonishing amount of energy to the outside world. The rocks were merely a byproduct of the release process. If the boy was standing on the ground right now, he would definitely be flustered by this sudden attack and might even be engulfed by the boiling lava. Unfortunately, he was currently standing in midair, so when he noticed the abnormality on the ground, he made a prompt decision to change his position. Haha, the wrath of the earth? What a boring little trick. The so-called earth in your eyes is just a small, insignificant planet in this universe. Moreover, you're still far from being able to truly control it. Since you don't want to kneel down and lick my boots, then die. As he spoke, the boy's originally black pupils suddenly released a faint silver light. Before the burly man could react to what had happened, he found that his feet had been firmly locked by an unknown black substance and was being dragged into the bottomless liquid bit by bit. No matter how he screamed and struggled, it was all to no avail. In the blink of an eye, the 13 kings became 12. What was even more terrifying was that the one who disappeared didn't die. His soul and body were being assimilated by the origin of curse, quickly transforming into a different form, a monster that existed between life and death, exuding hatred from head to toe. Admiring this creation that was filled with dark energy, the boy grinned and revealed a chilling expression. He muttered to himself, "Awesome. As I expected, the stronger the individual, the more powerful the cursed life form. The stronger it will be when it is transformed into a cursed life form. The only pity is that from the moment it was born, the upper limit of the cursed life form is already limited. There is no possibility of it continuing to grow. But it should be enough to deal with some small fries. Damn it, run. He wants to." The man emitting a bone-chilling aura acutely sensed what the boy wanted to do next and immediately warned his companions. But before he could finish speaking, the boy suddenly ordered the newly born cursed life form without turning his head, "Go, get rid of him for me. Roar." The distorted cursed life form let out a bestial roar and leaped into the air, kicking up a large amount of unknown black matter. Even the seawater was assimilated by the terrifying source of the curse. Although the man who used the power of frost tried his best to create obstacles to resist, no matter how hard the ice layer was, it would quickly disintegrate under the impact of the unknown black matter and was finally dragged in. By the time he reappeared, he was no different from the former. shock, fear, despair. Although the remaining 11 people were mentally prepared for death, they never thought that they would face an outcome that was 10,000 times more terrifying than death, becoming a cursed life form. Anyone who had some understanding of curses would definitely choose a quick and clean death instead of enduring eternal pain. After all, a cursed life form was not an undead. Under that crazy appearance and behavior, it was still a soul. It was just that this soul could not be controlled by the will and was always in a berserk state of venting. As the person who was cursed, they would always maintain absolute consciousness and would never be able to sleep or rest. They could only watch themselves do the most disgusting and hateful things. Under the control of fear, the woman who specialized in life magic was the first to submit. With a plop, she knelt on the ground and said with a voice full of humiliation, I am willing to become your slave and tell you everything about the prophet. Oh, are you sure? The boy slowly lowered his height and stopped half a step away from the woman. Yes, I'm sure. The woman nodded without hesitation. Very good. Now, stick out your tongue and lick my boots. The boy's face was full of undisguised malice. W.H. What? I said lick my boots. Lick them clean. Since you want to be a dog, you must have the awareness of being a dog. From today onwards, you better not think of yourself as a human. At least before you get my permission, your status is a dog, a pet that obeys orders. Do you understand? As the boy spoke, he raised his right foot to the woman's mouth. Chapter 1328. Looking at the pair of black boots in front of her, the woman's entire body trembled uncontrollably. Humiliation. Unbearable humiliation. She originally thought that licking boots was just an adjective, but who would have thought that she would actually have to do it? What was even more frightening was that if she licked it, then from today onwards, she would turn from a high and mighty king to a dog that was at his beck and call. But if she did not lick it, who knew what this demon-like boy would do to her? After all, she had already abandoned her dignity and chosen to be the first traitor. Just like how after breaking one's bottom line, one would not care about breaking it a second time or a third time. In the end, there would be no bottom line left. The boy did not rush her. Instead, he maintained his strange posture and patiently waited for her to make a decision. Through reading the shallow thoughts in her mind, he seemed to be able to sense her conflicted feelings at this very moment. He also understood that submission was an inevitable outcome. Most intelligent beings always felt that they were special, surpassing those primitive animals that did not even have self-awareness. However, they did not know that in their subconscious, they actually contained the same animal characteristics as other primitive beings. They could even be tamed like livestock. Without a doubt, the boy was trying to tame this woman who was emitting the aura of life. This was because this woman had the strongest will to survive among all the kings. At the same time, her psychological defenses were also the weakest. When the previous expeditionary army arrived, she was also the first to surrender and cooperate with them. Why, do you still need to consider? Turn around and look at those fellows behind you. Look at their eyes and tell me, do you have a second choice? The boy pursed his lips and spoke the cruel reality with a demonic tone. No one would like a traitor. Even if she was a traitor, she was no exception. From the moment she knelt down, the other 10 fellows looked at her as if they wanted to eat her alive. As for whether they hated this former comrade for betraying the entire group, or hated her for being the first to do so, the woman undoubtedly noticed the pairs of familiar, yet unfamiliar eyes. She released an absolute aura and bent down to lick the dirt and mud on her boots. As the master of life magic, she did not want to die more than anyone else, especially when she was half dead and had to bear an eternal curse. Ha 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 ha. That's right. That's it. What a good dog. The boy laughed maniacally as he stroked the woman's head. Then, using alchemy, he created a collar and chain out of thin air and put it around her neck. Like dragging a dog, he lifted the chain with force and asked in a mocking tone, "Tell me, who is the prophet you mentioned before? What role did he play in the destruction of the last expeditionary army? Most importantly, where is he hiding now? The prophet is indeed the prophet. No one knows his name. We only know that he has lived longer than anyone else, and has an extremely powerful language ability. It was his incomparably accurate prophecy that allowed us to know that the spatial ring was closing. We took advantage of the brief moment of chaos to launch a surprise attack and kill all the higher-ups, including the commander. At the same time, we destroyed the magic barrier and used large-scale AoE spells to defeat the enemy that attempted to counterattack. He hides in the deepest cave in this world. Unless invited, no one can find the entrance. The woman seemed to have accepted her fate. She did not struggle at all and allowed herself to be dragged like a dog. Accurate prophecy? That sounds interesting. Since he has such an ability, why didn't he predict my appearance this time? The boy sneered and questioned. The woman shook her head slightly. There was no prophecy this time. The prophet said that he has more important things to do, so he refused to join us. He refused to join us? Uh-huh. I'm starting to believe that he really has some kind of prophecy ability. As he said this, the boy's eyes shone with excitement and anticipation. There was no doubt that the so-called more important matter was definitely an excuse that couldn't be any more inferior. The guy who claimed to be the prophet must have foreseen the result. That was why he chose to hide instead of rushing to his death like these fools. Thinking of this, the boy waved his hand at the source of the curse that was about to break free. All right, don't be so impatient. These guys are all yours now. Enjoy. As the last word escaped his mouth, under the command of the source of the curse, all the distorted monsters on the scene rushed toward the last 10 kings like a tide of unknown black matter and swallowed them in the blink of an eye. Although these guys who were unwilling to surrender resisted with all their might, causing destruction and even changing the terrain of the surrounding dozens of square kilometers, unfortunately, they still could not escape the fate of defeat. This was because the one they encountered this time was not an ordinary commander of the Dowland Expeditionary Army, but a boy with a mysterious background. When the last king became distorted and assimilated by the curse, the Dowland Expeditionary Army, which had been waiting for a long time, finally came out in full force and began to destroy the last resistance forces. There was no mercy. There was no forgiveness. There was only cruel and merciless slaughter. Under the bombardment of the spellcaster army, one city after another was wiped off the map. Thousands of people were killed in an instant. The villages scattered around the cities were not any better. They were wiped out by teams of magic armor warriors. Everywhere they went, not even chickens or dogs were spared. If one were to observe from space, they would find that the green color that symbolized life on this planet was rapidly fading. It was replaced by black that symbolized the curse and red that symbolized slaughter. Sensing the extinction of a large number of species in the entire world, the woman could not help but cry out loud, because this meant that the power she used was also dying out to a certain extent. Life energy was never born out of thin air. Instead, it was formed by the convergence of thousands of animals and plants. But now, there is nothing on this planet that could be called alive. Life energy would inevitably decline rapidly until it became insignificant. Shut up. Dogs have no right to cry, understand? Stand up and take me to the prophet. I have a feeling that he must know many important secrets. After saying that, the boy raised his hand and snapped his fingers. In an instant, a portal without a fixed location appeared out of thin air. Without saying anything, the woman entered a trace of energy that symbolized coordinates into the portal. Then a vast expanse of mountains appeared on the other side. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1329. The impassable mountain range, as its name suggested, was a steep area located at the edge of civilization. The average elevation was over 10,000 meters above sea level. On one side was an endless sea, and on the other side was a vast expanse of white glaciers. In this world, this place could be said to be almost uninhabited. Even the bravest adventurer team would not easily step into the edge of the impassable mountain range. Because the name Impassable Mountain Range was not an exaggerated description, nor was it an artistic embellishment. It was a very simple description. No animals, no plants. There was only an extremely cold climate and a very harsh living environment. To be exact, there were no signs of life in this area. At most, There were some birds that crossed the mountains and flew from one side of the world to the other. To a certain extent, the impassable mountain range was equivalent to a wall, blocking the biting cold wind from the north. But today, two shadows broke the original silence. They slowly moved forward on the vast expanse of white snow, leaving a row of very conspicuous footprints. Without asking, it was obvious that they were not strangers. They were the woman and boy who had just stepped through the portal and arrived at this area not long ago. Following the endless expanse of snow-covered steep rocks for 2 to 3 days, they still could not find the cave entrance that was hidden by the prophet. They did not even find a trace of magic concealment. Obviously, either they hadn't found the right place, or the entrance to the cave wasn't the only fixed one and was constantly changing. No matter what, it meant that it would not be easy to find it. Feeling the knife-like wind blowing in his face, the boy sighed slightly and said to the woman with the collar in a threatening tone, "You know what? It's been almost 3 days. If you don't find any clues in 5 hours, then you better be mentally prepared." No, this is not my problem. As I said before, no one can find the entrance to the cave unless they are invited. The woman was so scared that she shivered and hurriedly explained, "Sorry, I don't accept any form of evading or excuses. You still have 5 hours, so work hard." Saying this, the boy gave her a meaningful look, then stepped on the thick layer of snow and continued to move forward. In contrast, the woman seemed to have received a strong shock. Her entire body was trembling slightly, and her eyes were filled with intense fear. She knew that if there was still no progress after 5 hours, what awaited her would be a punishment worse than death. In fact, the two of them had only spent about 50 hours together, and they hadn't spoken more than 20 sentences. However, this woman who had mastered life magic deeply understood that the person she was traveling with wasn't a boy at all, but a monster that emitted an aura of darkness and evil from the inside out. No emotions. There was no mercy or mercy. He would do anything that was beneficial to him and destroy anything that was disadvantageous to him, even if it meant the extinction of life on an entire planet. But in order to survive, in order to continue living, the woman had no choice but to rack her brain and frantically recall all the fragments related to the prophet, trying to find some useful clues. About 10 minutes later, she suddenly stopped and shouted in a slightly shrill voice, I remember now. Near the entrance of the cave, there is a very strange rock. It is not covered by snow, and there is not even a snowflake on it. A rock that is not covered by snow? The boy's eyes suddenly flashed with a bright light. If it was any other place, finding a strange rock that was not covered by snow was naturally like looking for a needle in a haystack. However, in this high-altitude mountain range that was covered in snow all year round, almost every corner was covered with thick snow. Therefore, a rock that was not covered by snow was as conspicuous as a light in the darkness. Without any hesitation, he immediately cast a spell to create dozens of magic eyeballs and began to search the entire mountain range, while he sat down and waited patiently for the results. Time flew, and 2 hours passed in the blink of an eye. When the woman began to feel a little anxious, the boy who had been resting with his eyes closed suddenly opened his eyes and grinned as he muttered to himself, "Aha, I found you." As soon as he finished speaking, he directly left the trembling woman kneeling on the ground and opened a portal to pass through. In the next second, a strange rock that looked like an old man kneeling on the ground and looking up at the starry sky instantly appeared in his line of sight. After careful observation, the boy realized that the rock was not made by man, but it was the work of nature. Just as he reached out his hand to touch the cover, an indescribable power suddenly appeared and then disappeared. When he came back to his senses, he realized that he was no longer surrounded by white snow, but a bottomless cave. In the deepest part of the cave, he could vaguely see a little bit of orange light, as if someone had started a fire inside. Interesting. A natural teleportation point? The boy muttered to himself as he walked along the dark tunnel. 7 to 8 minutes later, he saw an old man sitting in front of a bright fire. "Ah, you're finally here. Please take a seat. I've been waiting for you for a long time." The old man slowly raised his head, revealing an indescribably old face. Wrinkles, age spots, and extremely flabby muscles. It was hard to imagine that a life form whose physical condition had deteriorated to such a degree could still maintain a strong spiritual power. Especially those eyes. They were bright and clear, as if they could see through the past, present, and future. "You recognize me?" The boy squinted his eyes and carefully probed. The old man nodded gently. "Yes, I recognize you. From the moment you were born 12 years ago, I've already known your name, including the half of your body that you lost." "Half of my body? What do you mean?" "It's the literal meaning. When you were born into this world, you were split into two by an incredible force. One of you became the current you, and the other became your twin brother." "You mean we were actually the same person?" "Yes and no. If you don't mind, can I invite you to read a piece of enlightenment that I suddenly gained 12 years ago?" "Why not?" Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1330. Darkness. Chaos. This was a star field where everything was frozen. All space, time, and even physical phenomena were maintained in a state of absolute stillness. It was as if there would not be the slightest change until the moment the universe was destroyed. Just as the boy thought that the silence would continue, a smiling black suddenly appeared, and then it expanded at an extremely fast speed. Finally, with a bright and dazzling flash, the entire star field instantly released all its energy and completely turned into chaos and nothingness. At the same time, the scattered energy and matter in the form of a storm engulfed the space hundreds of times larger than itself. Countless civilizations vanished under the baptism of this storm, and some planets at the edge were only slightly affected. Mocha, where the Dalant civilization was located, clearly belonged to the latter. Without a doubt, this was very likely the reason for the birth of that unknown energy storm. But then, in the distorted and chaotic void, a pure soul without a trace of impurities passed through from the other side of the void and began to split at an extremely fast speed. In the end, it condensed into the appearance of two infants wrapped in some kind of unknown energy and matter. Along with the energy storm, it was captured by the gravity of Mocha. One of them was caught by the Dalant people with quick hands and eyes, while the other disappeared in the out-of-control spatial ring. As for what happened next, naturally, the boy began to learn and grow under the guidance of the Dalant people and displayed astonishing magical talent. "This is my origin." After the illusion completely dissipated, the boy stroked his chin and asked with interest. It was obvious that he did not fully believe it, but was full of all kinds of guesses and doubts. The old man did not seem to care at all and nodded gently. "Yes, at least from what I understand, half of that soul is you. It is also because of this that you have such terrifying power at this age, because you are not a new student in the ordinary sense, but a reborn." "Reborn?" A rare trace of confusion appeared in the boy's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by vigilance. "Then can you tell me what I am?" "Sorry, I am just a passive recipient. I can't control what I see. I can only be sure that everything I see definitely happened in some corner of the universe. Maybe it was the past, maybe it was the future. It doesn't matter to me who you are. What matters is that I accept the arrangement of fate, no matter how cruel it is." The old man shrugged helplessly. "That's why you're a natural-born prophet. You saw the destruction of the previous expeditionary army, and you also saw the destruction of this world. Now, you must have foreseen what I'm going to do next, right?" As he spoke, the boy's entire body emitted blatant malice. He raised his hand and mercilessly stabbed it into the other party's heart. Puff! The bright red beating heart was dug out just like that. Death had finally arrived. This was nothing. Everything in the world would die one day. Let me give you a small piece of advice before I die. Go and see your brother before everyone else. Maybe he can answer the questions in your heart. As for your and his real names, perhaps it shouldn't come from my mouth. Instead, you should find the answer yourselves." As the final word escaped her mouth, the prophet finally breathed her final breath. From beginning to end, she did not reveal any expression of fear, pain, despair, or confusion. Instead, She had a smile on her face, as if she had been freed. Looking at the old corpse beside the fire, the boy took a deep breath and muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear. Accept the arrangement of fate? That's the behavior of the weak. The strong will control their own fate, and even the fate of others. My dear brother, I'll be coming to find you soon. As soon as she finished speaking, he immediately released a powerful spell, burying the entire bottomless cave. As a cautious person, the boy understood the importance of keeping secrets better than anyone else. If anyone knew this secret, then what awaited them would be lying in a laboratory, undergoing endless tests and research. At the same time, Luke, who was far away on another planet, was standing on the ruins of the former capital of the most powerful empire, Los. He was admiring the enchanting scenery. After a few minutes, he opened his mouth and exclaimed, "This is incredible. I didn't expect this place to still have dense vegetation." Of course. It said that the evil invaders cast an extremely powerful nature spell on this city. More than 90% of the residents were killed by the vines and trees that suddenly appeared. Even after hundreds and thousands of years, it still continues to be effective. The only thing worth rejoicing over is that the baptism of time has caused the originally terrifying magical plants to gradually become mediocre. It has even become one of the few places suitable for living. A man who looked to be in his 30s explained with a smile. "Oh, but why don't I see many residents nearby?" Luke looked puzzled. It must be known that although a dense and primitive forest was not a suitable place for living, it was still 100 times better than staying in a vast and endless desert. Normally, a place like this should have been targeted by various factions or even fought over. But now, not only was this place deserted, everyone seemed to be avoiding it. It's very simple. Although the magical plants in the forest have deteriorated, they're still not to be underestimated. Now, we're at the edge, so it's not that dangerous for the time being. If you walk a little further, you'll immediately understand how terrifying it is. With that, the man in his 30s bent down, picked up a rock, and threw it into the distance. The next second, the originally silent forest suddenly came to life. Vines, trees. There were also those unknown flowers and plants. Everything surged towards the small stone. It was as if a green sea had swallowed the stone in an instant. Without a doubt, this forest was alive. It would try to tear apart anything that intruded into its body, regardless of whether the other party was alive or not. At this moment, Luke finally understood why he hadn't found any traces of animals or even insects after entering the forest. It was not that the environment here was not suitable for them to live, but that they had all been wiped out. Nature magic? I see. Staring at the forest that had returned to silence, a thoughtful expression appeared on Luke's face. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1331. There is no doubt that staying at the edge of a living forest was a rather nerve-wracking thing. Although the living environment here was 100 times better than the endless desert outside, when night fell, everyone in the group became abnormally nervous. They sat around the campfire and tasted the chowder soup made from unknown plants and dried meat. As an apocalyptic world where 80% of the land surface had been desertified, the vegetables and fruits here were 10,000 times more precious than meat. Even those high and mighty big shots might not be able to have a meal of fresh vegetables and fruits. Therefore, when everyone saw the green color in the pot, they couldn't help but swallow their saliva, even if they had eaten some strangely shaped green fruits that were full of water. However, the leader seemed to have some concerns and was not in a hurry to eat. He stirred the spoon in the pot and asked the boy without raising his head, "Luke, if you don't mind, may I ask if you're going to explore this huge ruin?" "Why not?" This was the capital of the strongest empire in the past, and was also known as the blessed land of the gods. To a certain extent, it represents the old world before the collapse of order and has considerable research value. Luke gently closed the old book in his hand and replied with a smile. If one were to ask what the biggest reward of this long journey across half the continent was, it would be the various complete or incomplete books and knowledge. Through these words that came from hundreds or even thousands of years ago, he finally had a clear understanding of this world and even the Dallin invaders. Simply put, this world was at the peak of theocracy before the arrival of the Dallin invaders. There were hundreds of gods with different names and titles competing for the faith of the mortals, trying to establish a unified kingdom of mortals under the control of the gods. Unfortunately, due to the inherent arrogance of the gods, none of them were willing to submit to the other. No matter how powerful the gods were, when faced with competitors of similar strength, they would form alliances based on their personalities, worldviews, and values. And it was the formation of these alliances that led to all kinds of strange internal conflicts, even at the peak of theocracy. Even believers were hostile to each other and killed each other just to please the gods they served. In the end, they paid a high price for their short-sightedness and ignorance. When the Dalen's people opened the portal and swarmed in, the city that was fought over by countless gods was instantly covered by terrifying magic plants. It was said that except for a few spellcasters who had great power, the rest, including the royal family, did not manage to escape. The once glorious and powerful empire collapsed overnight, and the remaining territories either surrendered or died under the invaders' fierce attacks. It was said that a large number of treasures, as well as the great library with the most books in history, were still intact in a corner of the animated forest. "Oh, are you here to pursue knowledge?" The leader raised his head with a surprised expression. One had to know that on this desolate planet, the most valuable thing was knowledge, and the least valuable thing was also knowledge. Although it may sound a bit contradictory, it was the truth. The reason why it was the most valuable was that under the Dalen's long-term invasion and oppression, much of the powerful magical knowledge and technology had been lost. Therefore, if anyone could find even a small part of it now, they would instantly become rich. Unfortunately, other than the knowledge that could create value, the remaining knowledge about humanities, geography, history, and so on were completely useless. For example, the book in the boy's hand only cost him 2 barbecued desert lizard skewers. That's right. Luke nodded seriously. Do you know? Since the destruction of this city, even the Dalen's invaders have not really set foot in it. I guarantee that the knowledge and wealth hidden here is far beyond what any of you can imagine. It's like a huge treasure waiting for the brave to dig it out. So, are you interested in going in with me? I guarantee that other than the books, everything else of value will be yours. Go deep into the forest. Are you sure you're not joking? Didn't the scene during the day make you realize how dangerous it is? Another woman couldn't help but interrupt. The risk is always proportional to the reward. If you don't take risks, how can you obtain such an enviable harvest? Don't you have to face danger when you travel through the desert? No. Even if you're at the lower end of the desert, you can still encounter bandits, monsters, and even giant sandworms. In this era full of pain and despair, every second of life is a risk. Since it's a risk, why not take a big gamble? If you succeed, you can live a comfortable life for the rest of your life. If you fail, you'll just be released early. As usual, Luke made use of his advantage in words and spying on the minds of others to encourage these cannon fodder who had already proven their value along the way. After all, although he had mastered powerful magical powers and could even clear a safe path in the forest, it was better to have help than not. At least he could sleep better when he rested. Hee, I admit that your words have moved me, but the problem is that there are too many visible dangers in this forest. I'm not even sure if you can safely advance 200 meters. The experienced leader smiled meaningfully, obviously not easily fooled. Just as Luke was about to say something, an ear-piercing scream suddenly broke the silence of the night. Ah, damn it, it's Cantor. The woman who spoke before suddenly stood up and looked in the direction of the scream. Unfortunately, her night vision was not outstanding, and she couldn't see clearly what was happening in the forest. After about 2 to 3 minutes, a pungent smell of blood came from afar. At the same time, there was the sound of blood dripping on the leaves. Everyone, stay alert. When the leader saw that the situation was bad, he couldn't be bothered to look at the boiling pot of soup. He pulled out his sharp sword and looked around nervously, trying to find the attacker. He knew very well what the scream and the smell of blood meant. It was death and slaughter. The team member, named Canner, was probably already a cold corpse by now. Chapter 1332. I'll go take a look. The tension and silence lasted for about 5 minutes. Finally, a woman with a furry bunny face couldn't hold it in any longer. She sprinted towards the source of the scream. Naturally, the leader couldn't just stand by and watch the second member die. He immediately waved his hand and signaled the other two to follow him. Not long after, they dragged a mangled corpse back to the campfire. To be exact, the corpse's head had been smashed by some unknown object, and its limbs had been crudely torn off. It looked like a ragged rag doll. What was even more terrifying was that all of its internal organs had been dug out, and most of its blood had been drained. The wound was clean, as if it had been licked clean. "What did you see?" the leader asked with a heavy expression. "Sorry, we didn't find anything. There were no footprints, no signs of struggle, and no signs of being dragged. I only found Canner's body." The bunny woman shook her head helplessly. It was obvious that she had a good relationship with the dead man. Her eyes were filled with sorrow and regret. No footprints. There were no signs of struggle or struggle. How is that possible? Canner was the strongest member of our team. If even he couldn't put up any resistance, how strong could the attacker be? The leader muttered to himself with furrowed brows. In this crazy world filled with all kinds of monsters and bandits, death was a very common thing. But to let an experienced adventurer die quietly without leaving a trace was definitely not in the category of normal. If there was something that could kill an experienced adventurer without a sound, it would be a huge threat to the rest of the team. Just as everyone stared at the tattered corpse with heavy expressions, Luke, who had been silent all this time, suddenly bent down and gently opened the white wound caused by excessive blood loss. He asked with a slightly doubtful tone, "Such a huge wound, and the blood was sucked dry? Did you check if there were any traces of blood around the body?" No. All the blood that flowed out of his body, including his brain matter, seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Another man who followed behind quickly explained, "What's wrong? Did you find something?" The leader quickly turned his attention to the boy. Although Luke looked very young, and could even be considered young, he had already proven his ability in the long journey, as well as his rationality and maturity that didn't match his appearance. "No, nothing. I just thought it was a little strange. Look at this incomplete corpse. If its target was a wild beast or a monster, would it only tear its body apart, eat its organs, drink its blood, and leave the rest of its flesh untouched?" Luke proposed a hypothesis straightforwardly. After all, this was a world with extremely poor resources. Most life forms would not even let go of rotten flesh, let alone fresh corpses that had just died. The leader was aware of the anomaly. He stroked his short beard and said, "You mean, the one who killed Canner was not a monster, but a living human like us? Maybe not, who knows? But there's one thing I'm sure of, and that's that this cruel method of killing is not so much a release of his natural instincts, but rather an attempt to create panic." With that, Luke cast his gaze towards the dark forest in the distance. He could feel a strong sense of malice in the darkness, locking onto the campsite beside the bonfire. But because it was well hidden, it did not expose its position. It wants us to be nervous, afraid, and panicked, and then kill everyone else in the chaos. The leader subconsciously tightened his grip on his weapon, anger brewing in his mind. He could accept his team members being killed or even eaten by wild beasts, but he could not accept the fact that the enemy treated them like prey. Yes, if I'm not wrong, we've met a cruel and cunning hunter. In his eyes, we're all prey, a source of entertainment. Unless the last person dies, he'll continue to tail us and look for opportunities. How about it? Are you interested in going to the forest with me and playing a game of life and death with this sneaky guy? Luke's lips curled into a smile, once again inviting them to join. He knew that, without him, this team would not be able to walk out of the forest alive. Judging from the stealth and sneak attack skills displayed by the hunters, unless these people always gathered together and didn't separate no matter what they did, once they separated or shifted their gaze, one or two of them would be instantly killed. The difference in absolute power was not something that could be made up with experience wisdom, and caution. The leader was clearly aware of this fact, and his face darkened. From time to time, he would exchange glances with his team members. According to their original plan, the team was only going to rest at the outskirts of the forest to replenish their precious water. They had never thought of risking their lives to go into the depths of the ruins. But now, they had been pushed into a corner by an unknown enemy. They could either retreat at the risk of being hunted down or risk being swallowed by the forest. They could bet the lives of every member of the team that the person who killed Cantor would not dare to enter the depths of the forest. There was no doubt that this was a dilemma. No matter which option they chose, it was likely that they would all be wiped out. After much hesitation, the leader finally took a deep breath and replied in a resolute tone, "Of course, we're ready, but I have a question. How do you plan on fooling this living forest?" "It's very simple. Let those plants that don't have the ability to think see you and me as their own kind. This is a special potion that allows the user to emit the natural scent of plants for a short period of time. As long as you don't do anything extreme, such as attacking the thick trees or vines, the forest will see you as a part of itself." Luke took out a bottle of potion that emitted a dark green glow from his pocket and passed it to the team members who were still in shock. This was the formula he'd obtained from the Dalen's person behind the scenes after solving the previous puzzle. The other party obviously knew his destination, or it would be too much of a coincidence for the formula to appear in this plane. Other than that, he also felt that the mysterious hunter was most likely a pawn sent by the Dalen's people to interfere with him. Or perhaps it was a part of the game that the two had agreed on beforehand. Chapter 1333. Choice was usually an illusion. Especially when someone with ulterior motives gave you a choice, it often meant that you had no other choice. Just like this team struggling to survive in this doomsday-like environment. In fact, they clearly knew that choosing to leave was tantamount to embracing death. Thus, they could only helplessly enter the depths of this dangerous forest. Although the magic potion could allow them to temporarily disguise themselves and not worry about the attacks of the strange trees and vines in the forest, no one knew how long this state could last, whether the potion would suddenly lose its effect or even accidentally hurt a certain plant, which would then trigger another attack from the entire forest. The most important thing was whether that terrifying hunter really didn't dare to approach the forest, let alone enter the depths of the forest like them. No one noticed that behind the dense shrubbery, a pair of cold and emotionless eyes were watching the team, slowly moving forward. Although the owner of the eyes was leaning against a thick vine, it wasn't attacked from beginning to end, nor did it react to any attacks. Once the team thoroughly disappeared into the large expanse of emerald leaves, it slowly stood up and revealed its original appearance. It was a bionic puppet pieced together with countless limbs. But it was different from the normal bionic puppets created by the Dalet. This one clearly wasn't humanoid, but rather a deformed upper body with 6 legs and 7 or 8 arms. Judging from the rough workmanship of the joints, as well as the thickness of the legs and arms, it was undoubtedly a different model of bionic puppet that had been forcibly removed and then reinstalled. Its surface was even covered in green moss, which clearly hadn't been cleaned for a long time. A large amount of dried blood could be seen in the cracks of its body, as well as rotten and smelly internal organs. At the same time, its eyes were very strange. They weren't like most bionic puppets, which had a clear gem color. Instead, they gave off a mix of madness, bloodthirst, and intense negative emotions. Blood, internal organs. Blood, internal organs. With these, I can have a soul and become a complete life form. The strange bionic alchemy puppet kept talking to itself in the language of the Dimensions. Then, it leaped between the trees like a spider and disappeared into the depths of the forest in no time. Roth, a huge city that had existed for hundreds or even thousands of years and had been passed down through stories passed down by word of mouth. Now, they couldn't even find any traces of the existence of intelligent life. There was no doubt that civilization was more fragile than most people imagined. Take those majestic statues and buildings, for example. They would gradually corrode in 100 or 200 years at most, eventually weathering and turning into a pile of meaningless wall-e. Most of the ideas and knowledge that poets and romantic scholars claim to be eternal would also perish along with the destruction of the carrier. There was nothing in the universe that could be called eternal. Even the stars would burn out one day. The only difference was that some things existed for a longer time, while others existed for a shorter time. However, in the context of the universe, regardless of how long they had existed, there was not much difference. Of course, to Luke, this city still had many things that he was interested in, including the large library that was said to preserve a large number of precious books, documents, and was blessed with a large number of defensive spells. It was said that it would not be damaged even after 1,000 years. This is the land of miracles, a city blessed by the gods. The leader stood on a small hill, dumbfounded as he stared at the dense forest below. If he hadn't discovered the ruins of a section of the city wall, he wouldn't have dared to believe that there had once been a glorious city that had been sung by wandering poets. That's right, this is the place. It seems that most of the city has been covered by vines, plants, and mud. We'll have to spend some effort to find anything valuable. Let's go, don't just stand there. Don't you want to get rich? With that, Luke was the first to take the lead and jump down from the small hill, entering the city that had already changed beyond recognition. Hundreds or even thousands of years had long since destroyed most of the buildings in this city. The damp air and rain made things worse. Only a few areas that had been protected by magic survived. There was no hesitation. After confirming that this was the city of Roth, the entire adventurer team took out their tools and carefully avoided the plants, digging into the soft soil. In just 2 to 3 hours, they found a large pile of exquisitely crafted metal sculptures, as well as ancient gold coins that were densely covered in red spots. Of course, these things had long lost their original value to this world that had already entered the end of the world. Only the weapons and armor that emitted a faint magical energy caused the ecstasy of every member. That was because these exquisitely crafted items had not been completely scrapped, even after being buried underground for hundreds of years. This was especially so for a few magical longswords that could easily cut the weapons they carried with them into two. Be it in terms of sharpness or toughness, they far surpassed the current metal smelting and casting techniques. Just as these fellows were in high spirits over this insignificant gain, Luke suddenly stopped whatever he was doing. He narrowed his eyes and scanned the surroundings. He could clearly feel that the strong and naked malice had returned. As expected, in less than a minute, a black shadow suddenly jumped down from the top of a giant tree that was over 100 meters tall. In an extremely strange manner, it hugged the rabbit-faced woman from behind and leaped onto a tree branch, wanting to use its speed to quickly disappear from everyone's sight. Try to run. Luke pursed his lips and revealed a cold smile. He stretched out a finger. The next second, a blinding white light instantly shot out from his fingertip, accurately hitting the attacker's back. Boom! Accompanied by a loud bang, the explosion caused by the energy ray instantly engulfed everything within a radius of a few meters. The black shadow that had lost its balance could not be lifted up like a grasshopper. In the end, it plunged head first into the soft soil, and the rabbit-faced woman in its arms took the opportunity to roll on the ground, escaping from the opponent's range of control. She could only be seen running wildly, panting as she shouted, "Quick! Kill it quickly! This guy isn't a living person. It's a twisted and deformed monster." Chapter 1334. Blood. Organs. Blood. Organs. Accompanied by a low roar, the black shadow quickly got up from the ground and caught up with the woman who was running wildly at a speed that was almost impossible to catch with the naked eye. It directly pushed her to the ground, waved its 7 or 8 arms, and twisted her limbs. Then it began to tear off her skin and muscles. In the blink of an eye, the internal organs in her chest and abdomen were completely exposed, and a large amount of blood splattered in all directions as the woman struggled in pain. Even more terrifying was that all the blood that splashed out seemed to be controlled by some unknown power and was completely absorbed into the shadow's body. Not a single drop fell on the ground or the surrounding leaves. Fierce, brutal, bloodthirsty, there was also an indescribable, shocking scene. Before anyone in the team could even react to what had happened. A living person had turned into a mangled and mutilated corpse. More! I want more! More! After devouring all the organs and blood in the corpse, the shadow didn't choose to retreat immediately. Instead, it slowly left the cover of the dark forest and appeared in everyone's line of sight. With the help of the sunlight shining through the gaps in the dense shade, Luke finally saw the true appearance of this hunter. His pupils suddenly shrank, and he muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, "A bionic puppet? How could this be?" After all, the Dalent civilization was a highly developed magic civilization. It had a highly developed system, as well as a rather sound worldview, values, and aesthetics. It definitely wasn't a rudimentary magic civilization that would do whatever they wanted without any review system or planning. Take the bionic puppet, for example. Every creation required the cooperation of several dozen branches to design the most ideal external form according to the characteristics of the target, rather than letting the creator do whatever he wanted. In short, the Dalent civilization had already upgraded from a primitive magic workshop to a magic version of an industrial assembly line. Apart from minor adjustments to the height, formula, face, and other parts of the final stage, the main structure wouldn't change too much. But this bionic puppet seemed to have been temporarily pieced together from scrap. Not only did it not have the slightest bit of beauty, it was instead full of distortion, sickness, and even madness. Especially those eyes that were filled with intense desire. It definitely didn't look like a normal puppet that only obeyed orders. Go! Kill this monster! Just as Luke was puzzled by the strangely shaped puppet before him, the team leader finally snapped out of his daze. He could no longer suppress the rage in his heart, shouting as he charged forward with the sharp blade in his hand. After all, the adventurer team had been able to travel through the harsh and dangerous desert many times. They had seen too many ferocious and terrifying monsters. Among them, there was no lack of behemoths with large bodies and vigorous vitality. Since these behemoths had already fallen at their feet, why would they still threaten a monster that was about the same size as them? The reason they felt fear before was because the enemy was always hiding in the dark, unseen and untouchable. Now that the enemy had appeared in front of them, the fear of the unknown immediately disappeared without a trace, replaced by a strong desire to avenge their dead companions. A few seconds passed in the blink of an eye. By the time a few members, including the leader, rushed forward and roared in an attempt to tear that deformed puppet to pieces, a large amount of dark red viscous substance suddenly spurted out of the puppet's body. Damn it! What the hell is this? I can't move. I can't cut it down. My weapon can't cut through them. For a moment, the first three guys to charge forward were instantly immobilized. Their entire bodies were shrouded in the blood-red viscous substance, and no matter how they struggled, they couldn't break free. What was even more terrifying was that the treasured swords they had just dug out were actually unable to cut through that seemingly fragile net. Blood, organs, blood, organs. Mine, all of them are mine. The strange bionic puppet didn't care about the other enemies around it. It crawled like a worm to an unlucky person who couldn't move. It abruptly opened its mouth to reveal a chilling smile and began to repeat the bloody and cruel scene from before. In less than a few seconds, the living member of the team was torn into a pile of tattered corpses. Inconceivable. It doesn't just devour flesh and blood. It also devours the souls of the dead. Luke stood motionless in place, watching this strange and even stranger bionic puppet. He had no intention of attacking, nor did he try to save his team members who were being cruelly slaughtered. This was because in his eyes, these guys were originally cannon fodder to be consumed. Compared to a special life form with considerable research value, they were completely worthless. The long-distance journey across half the continent allowed Luke to see the ugliness, darkness, and evil of human nature with his own eyes. He was no longer as naive as when he first left the tribe. Coupled with the knowledge and ideas that popped up in his mind from time to time, he, who still maintained the appearance of a boy, had become quite cold-blooded, as if it was some kind of innate nature. Sometimes, Even he felt that the Dalent who had been secretly observing and monitoring him was right. It was very likely that he really carried something similar to a memory inheritance, so there was a huge change in his personality. Of course, it wasn't just the change in his personality that puzzled him. Recently, when he rested, some inexplicable dreams often appeared in his mind. These dreams were so realistic that they could trigger the most extended resonance in his heart, as if he had experienced them himself. It was precisely because of this that he was eager to obtain more knowledge, to know the countless secrets buried in history, and finally found a place called the Sanctuary through the fragments one by one. Thinking of this, the boy finally took a deep breath when there were only 5 living people left in the team. He raised his hand and shot out a dazzling beam of light again. Instantly, boom! The bionic puppet that tried to pounce on another unlucky person was finally repelled by the violent impact, and one of its arms was forcibly broken in two. But what was interesting was that a large amount of dark red liquid was quickly secreted from the broken position, connecting the two halves of the arm together. At the same time, it repaired the extremely complicated internal energy and nerve conduction system at an incredible speed. In less than a minute, the arm was once again able to move. Chapter 1335. Self-repair and alchemy? No. This isn't self-repair in the ordinary sense. It already possesses the characteristics of a complete life form. Luke's eyes sparkled with excitement and curiosity, as if he had discovered something interesting. After all, although the bionic alchemy puppets created by the Dalent possessed a certain degree of self-repairability, it was impossible for them to reattach a severed arm after their nerve conduction and energy transmission systems were completely damaged. Rather than saying that this was the crystallization of technology, it would be better to say that it was a life form evolving and finally obtaining some kind of special ability. Without a doubt, this fellow with a strange appearance and behavior was no longer a simple alchemy puppet. Under the interference of an unknown power, it had evolved into a special half-artificial, half-life form. Although it didn't possess complex logic, thinking, and judgment, it already possessed a basic self-awareness. It even knew how to hunt other intelligent life forms, devouring their flesh and souls to promote its own growth. Blood. Organs. Give me your blood. Organs. The puppet clearly didn't possess high intelligence. It was purely following its original set of combat instincts and an unparalleled desire to complete its evolution. It kept muttering a few simple words in the Dalent language as it cast its gaze at the boy who had caused it great damage twice. It was clear that in its simple consciousness, it had already listed this little guy as its number one threat. As for the remaining members of the team, they were firmly fixed in place by the red sticky substance that was spewed out in the next few seconds, becoming lambs on the chopping board that could be slaughtered at any moment. Staring at the puppet that was cautiously approaching him step by step, Luke suddenly asked in the Dalent language that he had learned not long ago, "Who are you?" Who am I?" The puppet stopped, a puzzled expression on its face. "That's right. Who are you? Or rather, who do you think you are?" Luke guided the conversation with great interest. He could feel that the puppet in front of him shouldn't have such low intelligence. Perhaps it lacked communication, or perhaps it couldn't overcome its strong instincts and desires. In short, even if the lower part of the puppet's intelligence was preserved, it shouldn't have turned into such a strange state. "Who are you?" Not knowing how to answer, the puppet asked the same question in return. Needless to say, his intelligence potential was rapidly awakening. He even temporarily gave up on continuing to attack and stopped less than 10 meters away from his target. "I am Luke, a traveler who is interested in lost knowledge," the boy answered calmly. "Luke." The puppet tilted its head as if it was thinking about something. After a while, it asked, "Is that your name?" "Yes, that's my name. The elders who raised me gave me this name." Luke nodded with a smile. In the distance, the survivors who were trapped by the dark red sticky substance saw this scene and couldn't help but open their mouths wide. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. It was because in their eyes, the murderer who had killed countless of their companions was a deformed, twisted, cruel, and bloodthirsty monster. He should not, and could not have intelligence, let alone communicate with them. But now, Luke, who possessed powerful spellcasting abilities and was regarded as the only one who had the ability to fight against the monster, was actually speaking to the monster in a language they did not understand. What was he doing? A man who was wrapped in a cocoon of red sticky substance couldn't help but ask his companion who was close to him. The latter smiled bitterly and shook his head. How would I know? That child has a different way of thinking from all of us. Maybe he can convince the monster to let us go. Let us go? Are you kidding? That damned monster killed half of us, including Guide Xiong and the leader. Right now, even if we leave the forest alive, we won't be able to find the right path in this endless desert. We won't be able to remember the places where we can replenish our supplies and rest. Don't be naive. We've already lost our future and the right to live. An elderly man spoke of the cruel reality with a bitter expression. His words were like a terrible curse, instantly causing despair to appear in every survivor's eyes. It was so difficult to survive in this doomsday world. Often, an unexpected encounter could cause a seemingly strong team to collapse in a short period of time. However, the life and death of the team members was obviously not Luke's concern. At this moment, he was carefully observing where the puppet's countless limbs were connected. He asked meaningfully, "Did you put these limbs on yourself?" "Yes." The puppet nodded without hesitation. "Why? Why did you put so many limbs on yourself?" Luke continued to probe. "Because they can make me stronger. Hunt, then evolve. I want to have a real soul." The puppet raised its head, its eyes filled with extreme desire. Shocking. An indescribable feeling welled up in Luke's heart. He dared to swear that he had never seen such stubbornness and desire that would make one's scalp tingle. Desire usually referred to the view or idea that a living being had towards something. It was also the driving force behind putting it into practice. If a normal person's desire to live was 1, then this puppet's desire to obtain a complete soul was 1,000. Can you give me your flesh and organs? You're very strong. If I devour you, I'll definitely be reborn." The puppet slowly stretched out its thickest arm, trying to touch the boy's face. Unfortunately, before it could get close, Luke decisively cast a spell, using an energy field to separate the two. He stretched out a finger, smiling as he shook it in front of the puppet. No. I won't give my blood, organs, or even soul to you. On the contrary, I can give you another choice. A choice that doesn't require you to kill, but still allows you to obtain a complete soul. However, the prerequisite is that you have to tell me how you became like this, and how did you awaken your self-awareness? Most importantly, what secrets are hidden in the ruins of this ancient city? Soul. Give me a complete soul. Immediately. The puppet seemed to have been provoked, its emotions instantly becoming intense. Its attack was also raised to the highest level in an instant. If it wasn't for the energy field blocking it, it would definitely have charged forward at the first moment. Chapter 1336. Primitive, impulsive, hot-tempered, easily angered. You're like a special individual that hovers between an intelligent life and a wild beast. You don't know what restraint is, and only know how to greedily use violence to obtain. After confirming that the bionic puppet would not be able to break through the protection of the force field for a while, Luke's taut nerves relaxed a little, and he directly pointed out the other party's awkward situation. Due to the fact that this fellow had somehow gained self-awareness, due to the fact that his soul was incomplete, there was no way for him to control his emotions and even the strong desires in his subconscious. It was not that he did not want to control it, but that the most important part of his soul was missing. Give it to me. Give me a complete soul. Give me your blood and organs. The puppet did not seem to have heard anything, and continued to stare with his two blood-red eyes and roar. This was because he did not realize, nor had he ever felt, what a complete soul was like, and did not understand that no matter what kind of life it was, it needed a self-control and self-management mechanism. Only then would this life be a complete, intelligent life. Luke sighed slightly, and said in a rather helpless tone, "All right, it seems that I have two choices now. One is to first help you obtain a complete soul, and then we can slowly communicate. The other is to first subdue you and slowly torture the information I want. Believe me, although you're a puppet and have no nerves to feel pain, and you won't die easily, I have a way to make you feel pain, pain that comes from the deepest part of your soul. As soon as he finished speaking, with lightning speed, he took out a silver badge from his pocket and instantly activated the spell stored within. In the blink of an eye, divine energy enveloped the puppet and began to heal the large and small wounds and scars on its body. Without a doubt, this action not only stunned the puppet, but even the members of the team who were fixed to the ground by the red sticky substance all had looks of disbelief on their faces. No one could understand why a rational, normal person would use a healing magical tool on an enemy. But the next second, the originally silent forest suddenly seemed to have been reawakened, and countless vines like snakes instantly attacked the puppet that was being healed by the divine energy. It was not just the vines. Following there were countless towering trees that rose from the ground, as well as magical plants with all kinds of strange abilities. It was clear that these plants had been stimulated by the divine energy just now. To be more precise, they had captured the signs of non-plant life. After all, the reason why the puppet could move freely in this forest without being attacked was because its soul was not complete. It was between life and non-life. But now, the holy energy was working on the unknown sticky substance in its body. For this living forest, it was like a torch and a bright light in the darkness. What did you do to me? The puppet was like a nimble grasshopper, constantly jumping and dodging the attacks of the vines and trees. Its twisted face was filled with shock. With his current intellect, he was unable to understand the ingenious use of magical energy. His heart was filled with fear when he encountered such a concentrated and crazy attack. Nothing much, just a little trick that most spellcasters know. Do you think that you are very strong, so you like to obtain what you desire through killing and plundering? No, you're wrong. You are very weak, so weak that I don't even need to make a move myself to kill you easily. I know that the viscous substance in your body that has devoured countless amounts of blood, organs, and souls is actually the life energy that you intend to use to reconstruct your body. What if you use up all of this energy? Can you still repair broken limbs? Luke had a playful smile on his face as he said this. Observation was a very important talent. Those without this talent would often be unable to discover the hidden details no matter how many times they looked, let alone deduce the corresponding result from the details. But with this talent, even if it was just a few minutes, one could easily find the answer they wanted from the target. There was no doubt that Luke was such a person with a talent for observation. Through observing the puppet's short battle, he had already successfully deduced the ability that the puppet possessed, as well as how those messy limbs were installed. It had to be said that the evolution of life was indeed full of all kinds of accidents. For example, this interesting puppet, in order to adapt to the complex and ever-changing environment of this forest, actually developed the illusion that the more limbs it had, the stronger it was. One had to know that this forest had not been visited by anyone for hundreds of years. The density of the plants was far beyond the imagination of most people. The more limbs it had, the more advantageous it was to jump and climb the branches of the towering trees. But what was interesting was that this ability had now become a huge hidden danger, or even a stumbling block. The more the puppet moved and resisted, the more ferocious the attacks of the animated forest. And the more ferocious the attacks were, the more nimble the puppet had to jump to dodge, finally forming an endless cycle. Either the life energy stored in the puppet's body was exhausted, or the residual magical energy used to create this animated forest was exhausted. In short, one of the two had to fall. Save us. Quick, get these disgusting things off our bodies. Ah, damn it, that tree broke my leg. Seeing that the entire forest had gone berserk, the lucky ones who were still alive could no longer maintain their calm. They struggled with all their might while screaming for help at the top of their lungs. In just a short while, two of them were affected by the constantly moving animated giant trees. One of them died on the spot with his head crushed, while the other's right leg became a strange shape. Looking at those pairs of eyes filled with the desire to live, Luke shook his head with a cold expression and refused. I'm sorry. You have already lost the value of being saved. Moreover, even if I save you now, what can I do next? Won't I still be devoured by the cruel desert? Sometimes, living is a kind of pain, a kind of heavy burden. On the contrary, death is a kind of release. No, I want to live. I don't want to die. A male with an exceptionally strong desire to live tore a small hole in the red sticky substance and struggled to free half of his body. Following that, he raised the sharp blade in his hand and chopped off the leg that was fixed to the ground. Pooh! Fresh blood instantly spurted out, but he turned a blind eye to it and limped with all his might, desperately trying to escape to a safe place. Chapter 13:37. Flee. Flee with all his might. As long as he could survive, it would be worth it no matter how high the price he had to pay. The man who had lost a leg temporarily forgot about the pain and the discomfort he was feeling due to his strong willpower. His actions at this moment undoubtedly proved that when one's life was threatened, one could explode with an astonishing amount of potential. Unfortunately, before he could run far, the vines and trees that were originally chasing after the puppet suddenly seemed to have discovered something. They immediately turned around and strangled the escapee to death in just a few moves. Then, they trampled him into minced meat. Looking at the extremely tragic scene in front of him, Luke shook his head lightly and muttered to himself, "Idiot! Do you think you can survive by chopping off a leg? No, that will only expose the life force hidden by the magic potion and let this living forest discover your existence." Following the tragic death of the man, the remaining members of the team finally gave up resisting and began to close their eyes to accept their impending death. After about 10 minutes, they were completely annihilated under the continuous trampling and whipping of the giant trees. Like the majority of people struggling to survive in this doomsday world, it was basically impossible for them to live to a natural death. At the same time, under the frenzied siege of the entire deep forest, the puppet inevitably began to be injured. The life force stored in its body was rapidly depleted. In the end, it could not even maintain the regeneration of its severed fingers. It looked abnormally pathetic, as if it would be shot down, captured, and crushed into pieces in the next second. After all, the power of a puppet was limited, while the terrifying magic that animated this forest was the result of the collaboration of hundreds of talent spellcasters. The two were not on the same level from the beginning. Feeling the restless magic energy in the surrounding air, Luke began to seriously observe the performance of the plants after they were animated. Soon, he discovered that these plants did not have the ability to move freely. Instead, each plant had its own fixed territory. Once the puppet jumped out of the territory, the plants would return to their normal state. This also meant that, strictly speaking, this animated forest wasn't in a fully animated state like what the world thought it was. It was more like a machine that operated according to a certain set of rules. Only when a part of it was stimulated from the outside world would this part react and form a linkage. Unbelievable! One exquisite design, almost perfect control. Is this the foundation of an advanced magic civilization? Luke couldn't help but sigh. The more he learned about this race that had once conquered countless worlds, the more he felt that it was normal for the planet under his feet to become what it was now. Whether it was the magical knowledge taught by the elders or the books collected along the way, none of them could compare to the civilization created by the Dalent people. This was a difference in quality, a gap that could not be made up for with quantity. However, before the boy could figure out how the forest worked, the puppet in the distance finally couldn't hold on any longer. It was smashed into the ground by a thick tree trunk like a fly, creating a loud noise. Before the puppet could get up from the ground, the vines that followed it quickly wrapped around it like a dumpling and finally hung in the air. After losing its foothold, this abnormally agile fellow could no longer jump around, let alone break free from the vine's restraints. No, 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 let me go, let me go. The puppet clearly didn't realize what was going to happen next. It was still struggling with all its might, trying to tear apart layer after layer of incomparably tough vines. Unfortunately, its struggle was futile. Even if it broke one or two vines, more would come in to replace it. As his struggles grew weaker and weaker, a thin vine emitting a faint red glow suddenly emerged from the corner and inserted itself into the gap in the puppet's body at lightning speed. In an instant, a large amount of surging blood red and distorted life force was sucked out. Ah! Mine! That's mine! Give it back to me! The puppet screamed crazily as it felt its life force being rapidly drained away. However, its screams were completely meaningless to this forest. The animated trees didn't even understand any language, only operating according to the preset program. Without a doubt, the plants had discovered the puppet's source of life and were killing it by extracting its life force. In just a few short minutes, the puppet had lost the energy it had accumulated with great difficulty and was thrown to the ground like a rag doll. At this moment, it no longer had the ability to move. Its incomplete soul was like a flame in a storm that might be completely extinguished in the next second. How about it? Can we have a good talk now? Luke stepped forward with a relaxed and joyful smile on his face. You win. I lose. Everything I have will belong to you. The puppet's eyes were filled with intense hatred. This was its first failure in hunting, and it might also be its last. As a hunter who had taken countless lives, it understood that failure meant death. It meant that everything it had would be taken away by its opponent. Its worldview was simple and extreme, with no room for compromise. You're wrong. As long as you agree to my conditions, not only will you gain the right to live, but you will also be able to complete your incomplete soul. Remember, this is your last chance. Think carefully before you tell me your choice. With that, Luke took out the unfinished book and sat less than a meter away from the puppet. He began to read unhurriedly. Why should I believe you? How do I know that you have the ability to repair souls? How can you guarantee that you won't fulfill your promise after you get what you want? Hearing those words, the puppet's eyes burned with an intense desire to live once more. It raised its doubts in one breath. In its chaotic concept, there was no trust at all. There was only deception, killing, and plundering. I have no way to prove it, and I don't need to. Don't forget, you're the one who's about to die. The one who desires to live and obtain a complete soul is also you. You don't have the right to bargain with me. Either you choose to believe me and follow my orders 100%, or you wait for death to descend. As a half-life with an incomplete soul, if your body dies, you will cease to exist forever. Luke didn't even raise his head as he replied. This was because he knew better than anyone else that a half-life's desire to live and obtain a complete soul was even stronger than most intelligent life forms. What it thought wasn't important. What was important was that the puppet would eventually submit. This was its innate nature. Chapter 1338. This is the place you were talking about? Luke asked without turning his head as he stared at the strange plant in front of him that was thicker and more luxuriant than the other trees around it. It was a vine with red leaves. From the root to the tip, it was in the shape of a regular double spiral. The surface of the vine was covered with thorns, and the two rose alternately until they merged into one at the top. No one could tell if these were two vines that grew from the same root or two relatively independent plants. The only thing that could be determined was that the surrounding plants seemed to be afraid of it. Not a single weed grew within 100 meters of it. Of course, I was born here. It gave birth to me, and it awakened me. Following closely behind, the puppet's face revealed an extremely complicated expression. It no longer had the cruelty, bloodlust, and madness from before. Instead, it was as cautious as a frightened animal. Of course, it wasn't because it had changed, but because the energy that kept it from dying was completely provided by the boy. Thus, it didn't dare to make any hostile moves. Otherwise, the energy attack would be cut off instantly, and it would return to the awkward state of being unable to move. Interesting. This means that this plant in front of us is the core of the entire animated forest. It could even be said that it's the heart. It's the one that maintains and controls all the plans to attack enemies near the forest. Luke wasn't an idiot in magic. He could tell the true function of the red double spiral vine with a single glance. especially the surging life force hidden at the root. It was even more dazzling than the stars in the sky. Now, he finally understood why a puppet would unknowingly awaken its own consciousness. It wasn't luck, fate, or coincidence. No matter what fell in the vicinity, after being nourished by the surging life force for a long period of time, it would nurture a completely different new life. This was an inevitable outcome. Even without the remains of the alchemy puppet, there would be rocks, soil, and even air to replace it, forming a completely new elemental life. After thinking this through, Luke looked at the puppet with a gaze that made one shudder with fear. After a full minute, he continued to ask, "Then what about the library? Where is it hidden in the ruins of this ancient city?" "It's right under your feet." The puppet seemed to have sensed something and immediately took 2 careful steps back. If it wasn't for the fact that its life was still in the hands of the other party, it would have immediately chosen to turn and run. "Under my feet." Luke subconsciously lowered his head and glanced at the bare ground. Sure enough, he found a few exposed white stones. One had to know that this was not an ordinary stone, but a special product of this world, a precious stone named Blessing. It was said that this kind of stone had incredible energy affinity and could accommodate and store all kinds of energy. Back then, the gods liked to use this kind of material to build their own sanctuary in the mortal world. Unfortunately, after the arrival of the Dalence people, the blessed stone was plundered for hundreds of years and had been depleted. Even a piece the size of a palm would cause the spellcasters to fight over it. That's right. At the start of the war, my kind and I were dropped here to blend into the crowd and create panic and chaos. Then, that terrifying nature magic descended upon them. Tens of thousands of plants were activated by magic. Pain, despair, and death shrouded the entire city. In the eyes of Master, we are just disposable consumables. They don't even treat us as living beings. While saying this, the tone of the puppet revealed a strong hatred. Without a doubt, this was the last memory it had before it awakened its self-consciousness. At the same time, it was also the first war the Dalence people launched to conquer this world. Was it resentment from being abandoned? Or was it hatred from being ignored? Luke obviously didn't know what the puppet was feeling at this moment. Perhaps even the puppet itself didn't know. From the perspective of life, it only wanted to complete itself and live on as a complete life form as much as possible. It had to be said that this desire and request couldn't be any lower. But regrettably, as long as it was alive, it would constantly kill and plunder to obtain the nutrients it needed to survive. It was just like how the natives of this world needed food to fill their stomachs. This had nothing to do with justice or evil. It was determined by the puppet's innate life form. The only way to maintain the puppet's survival was to kill intelligent life forms and devour their blood, organs, and souls. Otherwise, it could only find a spellcaster who was adept at controlling energy and continuously provide it with energy. But even if the spellcaster was willing to do so, it believed that the puppet wouldn't be willing to do so, because this meant that it had completely handed over its right to life to another person. As long as that person had the slightest malicious intent, it would fall to the ground in the next second, unable to move at all. Do you hate the Dalence people who created you and then abandoned you? Luke casually picked up a white stone that had been ravaged by wind and rain and asked, "Of course I hate them. They created me, but didn't give me a complete soul. In the end, they abandoned me like trash. Can you tell me why?" The puppet raised its head and roared with gritted teeth. Luke smiled and shook his head. "No, you don't understand. You and your kind weren't designed as complete life forms from the moment you were born. From the perspective of the Dalence people, you're just a bunch of tools like weapons, armors, and other inanimate objects. Think about it. Would you treat something that can be mass-produced and consumed as a treasure? Thus, it's normal for you and your kind to be abandoned. As for you gaining self-awareness later on, it's merely a coincidence, or perhaps a kind of luck. As far as I know, in order to conquer this world, the Dorentians sent thousands of bionic alchemy puppets just like you, but only you happened to land near that interesting plant and slowly grew under the nourishment of its huge vitality. All right, let's stop with the idle chatter. Let's talk about the conditions we agreed on before. You intend to fulfill your promise? A trace of undetectable joy flashed in the puppet's eyes. No, of course not. I just feel that since you were born here, you must have some sort of connection with that plant. Perhaps you could become a good medium and help me absorb the remaining energy at its roots. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1339. No, don't even think about it. The puppet seemed to have been provoked as it leaped 6 meters into the air and landed firmly on a branch of a tree. Its eyes were filled with shock and vigilance. Even though its intelligence was still at a relatively low level, it wasn't a complete idiot. To be precise, it was far more sensitive to anything that could threaten its life than anyone could imagine. Looking at the puppet's shocked and furious reaction, Luke smiled nonchalantly and asked, "Do you think you have a choice? Even your life is now being maintained by me, so you don't have the right to refuse. You only have the obligation to obey. Don't worry, even if it's for the sake of obtaining as much life energy as possible from that plant, I will carefully protect you from dying. Now, get down from the tree immediately. Otherwise, I will cut off the energy supply to you and make you lose your ability to move and fall down." Despicable. Shameless. Even though the puppet tried its best to search for the few words in its memory and cursed incessantly, it still obediently jumped down from the branch in the end. Just like what was said before, it no longer had a choice. If it obediently cooperated, there was still a chance of survival. However, if it resisted, it would instantly enter a state of near death. After experiencing that indescribable helplessness, powerlessness, and despair once, it definitely didn't want to experience it a second time. Very good. I like obedient children. Come, let me check your body and see what kind of astonishing changes the energy has caused you. Saying that, Luke deftly manipulated his 10 fingers and borrowed the power of magic to easily tear apart the complex outer shell on the puppet's body. In an instant, he saw a shocking scene. He saw that the torso that was originally filled with magical runes and nerves that transmitted energy to the system was now densely covered with red threads that resembled blood vessels. Inside these threads, a blood-like liquid was constantly flowing, endlessly surging towards the cocoon at the chest and flowing out from this cocoon, forming a stable life cycle. Without asking, it was obvious that this cocoon was the half-materialized heart, while the net-like red threads were equivalent to blood vessels that were used to transmit energy. The dark red viscous substance that gushed out of his body was, in fact, fats and the like that were stored by all living beings. It was a necessary consumption for survival when food wasn't available in time. Unfortunately, the energy that the puppet had painstakingly accumulated had been sucked dry by the red vine. Its entire body looked empty. Haha, just as I expected, you are the life created by that plant. Although it did not do so consciously, it is undeniable that it is your father and mother. You can even call it the creator. Luke gently touched this seemingly fragile cocoon as he smiled and exclaimed in admiration. A plant that didn't even have self-awareness became a creator? And he even created a self-aware life form? It might sound a little unbelievable, but it was the truth. What on earth do you want to do? The puppet's voice was filled with intense anger. It's simple. I need to borrow your heart. It is the bridge between you and the plant, and it is also the only thing that resonates between the two of you. As soon as he finished speaking, before the other party could react, Luke reached out his hand and grabbed the fragile cocoon. Without a word, he pulled it out from the complicated threads. No! Accompanied by a heart-wrenching roar, the puppet's eyes instantly dimmed. All of its arms and legs seemed to have lost their strength and slowly fell to the ground as if it were dead. However, Luke turned a blind eye to it. Carefully holding the fragile cocoon to the weird plant, he mumbled to himself in a voice that only he could hear, "Then the next step is to resonate with this little thing and slowly absorb the enormous vitality stored at the root. I have to control the speed of absorption or my body will explode. Become stronger." This was the desire and instinct that emanated from the depths of any living being's soul. Only by becoming stronger could one ensure that one in one's race could survive the cruel competition and continue the bloodline's inheritance. The only difference was that some life forms chose to evolve with individual strength, while others chose to evolve with numbers and reproduction speed. However, no matter how one evolved, there was always a standard that could be used to measure the strength of a certain life form. That was the quantity and quality of a life force contained in the body. If he could successfully absorb the energy of the red plant before him, Luke would obtain a long lifespan. His body would even stop growing, aging, and dying, maintaining this state for tens of thousands of years. Apart from this, he could also use the process of absorption to spy on the powerful nature magic that the Dalen's people had used back then, broadening his horizons. Driven by these two motivations, he finally made up his mind and injected a strand of energy into the cocoon. Instantly, the thin red threads wrapped around the surface of the vines seemed to come alive again. With lightning speed, they wrapped around the two red vines. They were like tentacles, impatiently absorbing energy the moment they came into contact. In the blink of an eye, the cocoon, which had been beating weakly, began to swell. At the same time, its beating became stronger and stronger. Without a doubt, having lost the restraint of its subjective consciousness, it did not understand that absorbing large amounts of energy meant that it would eventually exceed its limits and explode on the spot. When the cocoon had swelled to the point where the surging life force within could be seen, Luke finally could not suppress the desire in his heart and began to continuously extract energy from within the cocoon. This inhalation and exhalation quickly formed a stable cycle. After around 3 to 5 minutes, all the pores on the boy's body closed, including his hair and eyebrows. Large patches of the outermost layer of skin withered, died, and fell off. It was not an easy matter to complete the transformation of one's life essence. It could even be said to be extremely dangerous, and one had to pay a certain price. However, Luke had undoubtedly made mental preparations. He did not care about the hair that fell off or the dead skin on the surface of his body. Instead, he focused all his attention on guiding the life force into his blood vessels, internal organs, and even the deepest parts of his soul, allowing the most important parts to obtain sufficient energy first. Chapter 1340. Withering, Death. As the life energy that maintained this living forest was taken away, all the plants welcomed their final end. The originally lush trees and the vines that wrapped around the branches were disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. What replaced them was a lifeless land that emitted a disgusting smell of decay. In particular, the pain and resentment of the residents who had died in this city quickly regained their freedom from being suppressed, releasing the anger that had been suppressed for thousands of years to their heart's content. There were tens of thousands of spirits that emitted green fluorescence, and the undead army formed from white skeletons that stretched as far as the eye could see. If one did not see it with their own eyes, no one would believe that a forest full of green life would turn into such a ghastly state in less than half an hour. Even the scorching sunlight that shone down from the sky could not disperse the extremely dense black fog above the forest. However, just as the dense fog of death spread and almost covered the entire area that the forest originally covered, it could not get close to the red double spiral vine in the center of the forest. However, this microsecond balance did not last long. When the first leaf at the top of the vine began to wither and slowly fall down, a surge of energy suddenly spewed out from the root, engulfing everything within a radius of tens of kilometers. Whether it was the resentment of the dead or the dense negative energy that even the scorching sunlight could not disperse, they all disappeared without a trace in the end. Moreover, in the process of releasing the energy, large amounts of soil and gravel were taken away from the ground, causing the buildings and historical sites that had been buried for thousands of years to be exposed without exception. In particular, the exquisite library was not damaged at all. Instead, the main body of the stone material absorbed a part of the energy, showing brilliant colors under the sunlight. Of course, these drastic changes in the surrounding scenery and environment were far from the metamorphosis of the boy's life level. The sun rose and set. With the continuous alternation of day and night, more than 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. When Luke opened his eyes again, the red double spiral vine in front of him had turned into some kind of translucent crystal. With a light touch, it turned into dust and scattered with the wind. This feeling is simply indescribable with words. The corners of his mouth lifted slightly, revealing a joyful smile. There was no way he could not be joyful. This was because at this moment, the world in his eyes was completely different from before. He could even distinguish the traces of life left on the ground and in the air without exception. As for the cocoon in his hand, the surface of the countless red threads that entangled it had turned into a smooth, oval gem. However, it was obviously not a gem in the ordinary sense. It stored a large amount of life energy that had not been completely absorbed and contained various impurities. Even though it was no longer of much use to Luke, it was still a treasure that could change the fate of those mortals who were still struggling to survive. Of course, the most important thing was that it contained an incomplete soul with self-awareness. Once it was discarded, it would not take long for it to be resurrected again. There is no doubt that he had never intended to fulfill his promise from the very beginning, nor did he care about the curse or retribution that might be triggered by breaking his oath. After all, these things were only mental anesthetics that the weak used to comfort themselves. They were the desperate roars of cowardice and powerlessness, the venting of hysterical emotions. Apart from that, they had no other meaning. Life, what an interesting and complicated thing. It is both fragile and strong, full of infinite possibilities. Perhaps I should give you a chance and see what kind of fruit that strong persistence can bear in the end. As Luke spoke, he picked up the tattered bionic puppet from the ground. It was almost impossible to tell its original appearance. He stuffed the crimson crystal into it. The next second, the withered red threads recovered in less than a second and absorbed the energy from the crystal as if they were thirsting for it. In less than a minute, the tattered puppet stumbled and stood up again. Its eyes emitted the joy of coming back to life. Feeling the abundant energy provided by the life core, it raised its head and asked in an uncertain tone, "What did you do to me?" "Nothing. I just left some things that I didn't need to you. Now you are free. You could do whatever you want." Luke replied as he walked toward the exposed main entrance of the library. Thanks to the special stone material, the ancient building didn't suffer much damage. Some of the defensive spells were even activated under the impact of the energy. "What about my soul? You promised to help me mend my incomplete soul." The puppet jumped up and blocked the only entrance to the library. "Hee, are you sure you want me to mend your incomplete soul? Do you know what it means to mend your soul?" Luke stopped and threw out two extremely serious questions. The puppet shook its head without thinking. "I don't know. I don't want to know. I only want a complete soul and a true life. This is your promise. It is time to fulfill it." "Fool. The completion of your soul means that all your memories, emotions, and personality will disappear from the moment you gain self-awareness until now. In their place will be a completely different you. From a certain perspective, completing your soul is the same as killing you and creating an even more perfect you. Tell me, even so, you still want to mend your incomplete soul?" Luke sneered and questioned loudly. He wasn't trying to scare the puppet. With the knowledge he currently possessed, this was the best he could do. As for the more complex and profound secrets of the soul, he hadn't come into contact with them yet. "No, you're lying to me. I'll kill you. I'll kill you." The puppet didn't change its personality and way of doing things just because it obtained a stronger heart. It wasn't good at thinking at all. The only way it knew how to resolve conflicts was to kill and seize. In addition, the energy provided by the heart was 100 times more than before, causing it to have the illusion that it could already defeat the boy. Therefore, after it roared, it quickly infused life energy into its limbs, causing it to produce an effect similar to a gush of air. It directly pounced at Luke at lightning speed. Chapter 1341. Sigh. I knew it would turn out like this. Looking at the puppet that was getting closer and closer to him, Luke just sighed and raised his hand to activate the two tall and mighty metal statues at the entrance of the library. Instantly, the two behemoths came to life and waved the exaggerated weapons in their hands. They directly swatted the puppet that was flying in the air like swatting a fly. Bang! After a muffled sound, the puppet was like a meteor that drew a beautiful parabola in the sky and fell into a pit 2,000 meters away. It probably wouldn't be able to get up for a while. Glancing at the dust caused by the collision, Luke straightforwardly ordered the two metal statues to guard the entrance and then strode into the palace filled with knowledge. Solemn, silent. When he stepped into the hall filled with bookshelves, he finally understood why the gods suggested that he come to this city to take a look. Only here he could truly understand the civilization, knowledge, and history created by this world. Only here he could deeply understand the strength of the Dalent people and make up for the gap between him and them through learning. Knowledge was a ladder. It was the only tool that could allow lower life forms to get rid of their inferiority and complete self-transcendence. Regarding this point, Luke had always been very clear. He carefully took out a thick book that hadn't decayed for thousands of years under the protection of magic from the bookshelf. He quickly became engrossed in reading, one book after another. The boy was like a dry sponge, absorbing knowledge as much as he wanted in this ocean. No matter what happened in the outside world, it couldn't affect him at all. He didn't know that the moment he entered the library, far away in the fallout shelter, a terrifying storm was brewing. Everyone, we can't go on like this. Wells' body has entered the countdown to death since 7 days ago. If he protects himself in the fallout shelter, everyone here will die. A female Dalent stood in front of thousands of her compatriots and shouted in an agitated tone. Damn it, that guy still hasn't come out of his infatuation. A man gritted his teeth and cursed. Ever since they found out that the Dalent named Wells didn't eat or drink, locked himself in the room all day, and didn't sleep to look at the strange boy in the mirror, the management organization established in the fallout shelter tried everything and even resorted to violent means. In the end, not only did they not solve the problem, they almost triggered an energy vortex in advance. After this failed operation, the option of violent arrest was inevitably abandoned and replaced by a variety of bad ideas. In fact, at this stage, the Dalent people in the fallout shelter couldn't come up with a good solution. They could either let Wells leave by himself, or let everyone leave and let him detonate the powerful energy vortex. Looking at the nervous, panicked, and meaningful gazes, the Darention woman raised her hands and motioned for everyone to remain quiet. She continued, I understand that you are very disappointed with the current management ability of the fallout shelter, and you even yearn for the ring of space to be repaired. Then, you can destroy this barren world that has lost its value and return to our rich mother planet. But the problem is that repairing the space ring is not an easy task. Not to mention, with the degree of barrenness of this planet, do you think the mother planet will prioritize repairing it? You mean, we've been abandoned, don't you think? Another older Dalent spellcaster raised his head, and his eyes flashed with a sharp gaze. Abandoned? In this group of utilitarian people, this was not a rare thing. Just the records of abandoned barren worlds were more than 100. Needless to say, the Darentions stationed in those worlds would never be able to return to their home planet. Instead, they would be exiled like criminals until they were completely dead, or they would establish absolute rule on a barren planet. No one wanted to be an abandoned member, because that meant losing the future, losing the channel to obtain knowledge, power, as well as the identity that they were proud of. Especially their descendants. They would gradually degenerate as they were unable to obtain excellent bloodlines from the tribe, and eventually merge with the natives that they despised. No, that's not all. We still have a chance. Seeing that many people's emotions have been stirred up, the woman finally threw out a bait. Plan? What plan? Do you have a way to repair the ultra-long-distance portal blocked by the energy storm? Another man could not help but ask loudly. If I had the ability to repair the portal, do you think I would wait until now? No, we don't have that kind of technology, let alone that kind of knowledge. But I know someone who can help us. With that, the woman raised her hand and created an illusion. As for the content of the illusion, it was nothing else but a boy who looked exactly like Luke. The only difference was that this boy was wearing a robe that symbolized the high-level spellcaster of the Dalant civilization. His eyes revealed a strong confidence that did not match his age. Isn't this the boy that Veers is obsessed with? No, he's not. Although that boy has shown incredible talent, his understanding of magic is far from being able to wear the robe of vision. I remember now. Some time ago, when I was communicating with the Mother Planet, I seemed to have heard a rumor. It was him who invented the method to repair the spatial ring, and personally led an expeditionary force to conquer World 93. For a moment, many people began to exchange information with each other. Due to the isolation, there was no way to maintain contact with the Mother Planet at all times like one glance. Instead, it required a period of time to report the situation, and a small amount of information would be sent. So until now, many people had not figured out the truth of that year. That's right. This boy was the supreme commander of the expeditionary force of World 93. I think if he knew that there was a guy who was very similar to him, or even identical to him, in our world, what do you think he would do? The woman pursed her lips, revealing a half-smile. Of course, he would rush over immediately. I understand now. What we need to do now is not to seek help from the Mother Planet, but from the expeditionary force of World 93. Chapter 1342. How is it going? Are the survivors still struggling in vain? Sitting on a chair in the central steeple hall of the magic fortress, the boy held his chin and looked through the images that were transmitted back from various places. He admired the planet that he destroyed with his own hands and asked without even lifting his head. Ever since he received the secret of his birth from the prophet, not only did he not show any signs of abnormality, but he also continued to return to the expeditionary army to fulfill his responsibilities. With the defeat of the 13 kings, this world had lost its last defense. Whether it was the contagious curse that continued to spread or the people of the Dalant who unleashed their fury to their heart's content, it was enough to completely annihilate the remaining lives. At the same time, all kinds of large-scale magic puppets were created one after another to plunder and extract those precious and important resources, especially the non-renewable mineral resources that were buried deep underground. After simple processing, they were continuously sent back to the Mother Planet for further processing. When the plundering and extraction assembly line was fully operational, the boy could even hear the sorrowful cries of this world. Without a doubt, this was the typical revenge of the people of the Dalant. It was the price that this world had to pay for the destruction of the last expeditionary army. Yes, Sir Commander. Those surviving fellows hid behind a canyon fortress, thinking that they could rely on the natural barrier to survive the catastrophe. The leader of the shapeshifters who stood by the side showed a cruel and cunning smile on his face. Needless to say, his subordinates must have already infiltrated and could create panic and chaos at any time. They could even open the gate and let in a few people who were infected with the curse. However, the boy obviously did not intend to do that. Instead, he asked with interest, "How many people are left?" "About 500 to 600,000. A small number of them are children, but there are no old people." The leader of the shapeshifters gave a relatively accurate number without hesitation. "If that's the case, then let them live. Send out spellcasters and build a few walls that are more than 50 meters tall for them. Then spread the word that this is salvation from the gods." The boy ordered casually, "You mean to keep them in captivity? Let them think that we are gods." A strange light flashed in the eyes of the leader of the shapeshifters. He instantly realized the intention of doing so. Without a doubt, as a planet that was almost completely destroyed by the contagious curse, most of the land could no longer be used for farming. Only the canyon could barely sustain a population. This also meant that due to the limitations of food, water, and other resources, the survivors had lost the foundation to develop a civilization again. They could only hide behind the wall to survive. Even if the population recovered to a certain extent in the future, they could only send the excess population to their deaths to ensure that internal conflicts would not lead to a collapse of order. That was right. They would be kept in captivity like cattle and sheep and become the toys of the Dalent people in the future. In the eyes of the shapeshifter leader, his commander not only had to conquer this world physically, but also mentally. Callous, heartless, cruel. He really couldn't figure out how a teenager could have such vicious thoughts. Didn't he see that several Dalent's men, who had always been known for their cruelty and cunning, couldn't help but reveal a horrified expression? The boy clearly saw through the thoughts of these people in the hall. He nodded with a faint smile. That's right. From this day forward, we are their gods, their demons, their beliefs, and the object of their fear and despair. Control. I want the expeditionary army to be the master of their fate. Understood. I'll do it right away. The shapeshifter leader bowed and immediately turned to leave without another word. He understood that he couldn't ask any more questions. Otherwise, who knew what would be waiting for him next? Not long after he stepped out of the door, a Dalent woman in charge of communication quickly walked in from the side door of the steeple. She reported with a slightly nervous voice, "Sir Commander, I just received a message." "Oh, is it from the mother planet?" The boy turned around and glanced at it. "No, it's from another isolated world, and it's also one of the first few worlds that we conquered." As she spoke, the woman handed over a slate with information recorded on it with both hands. Another isolated world? Instead of using precious resources to contact the mother planet, they actually have the time to send me a message. The boy muttered to himself with a strange expression as he took the slate and read the information stored inside. The moment his finger came into contact with the stone slab, his pupils suddenly contracted, and his originally indifferent expression instantly became serious. After a full minute, he opened his mouth and asked, "Who else has seen this information? Who else knows?" "You're the first other than me," the Dalent woman quickly replied. Even if it was impossible for her to know what happened 12 years ago with her rank and position, she knew that this was definitely unusual. "Very well. As a reward, you can die now." As soon as he spoke, the boy immediately released a terrifying magical energy that squashed the Dalent woman before him into a meat patty. At the same time, the slate in his hand was crushed into powder. The sudden change not only caused the dead woman's eyes to shine with disbelief, but even the guards who were standing guard around them tensed up as well, each of them showing a wary expression. However, the boy clearly wasn't in the mood to pay attention to them. He stood up from his chair and ordered loudly. Immediately informed the spellcaster army to prepare for long-distance teleportation. Within 3 days, open a portal to World 02 for me. What? World 02? A male spellcaster opened his mouth subconsciously. After all, as one of the first few worlds to be conquered, World 02 no longer had many valuable resources, which was why the level of teleportation restoration was rather low. He simply couldn't understand why such an extremely barren world was worth wasting so much resources and energy to clear those troublesome energy storms. "Do as I command. Don't ask why." With that, the boy strode down the steps and stood before the other, his entire body releasing an indescribably strong pressure. At this moment, he was like an invincible giant in the eyes of the male spellcaster, pressuring him to the point that he could not breathe. I understand." As he squeezed those words out of his mouth, he instantly felt the suffocating pressure vanish. Chapter 1343. Obviously, it was not an easy task to break through the ultra-long-distance teleportation device that was blocked by the energy storm. At least at this stage, only the boy alone in the entire Dalent civilization could do it. As for the spellcaster legions in the expeditionary army, they could only do odd jobs in the periphery. When they really touched the core area, no one dared to touch the energy storm that was enough to tear a person apart alive. Therefore, when the huge army-level teleportation portal was completed, the boy appeared in front of a huge, chaotic building and stared at the people in front of him whose eyes were shining with a strange light. In order to keep this a secret, he had personally cut off the connection between this place and the mother planet. Therefore, anyone who was not a fool would realize that the supreme commander of the expeditionary army was planning something important. Unfortunately, no one present dared to stand up and raise an objection, let alone make a move to resist. Because in the process of conquering this world, the boy had used too much blood and death to prove how cruel and ruthless he was to his enemies. They did not want to end up like the natives. After all, after the city wall was built, everyone could clearly see the changes of the survivors every day. These poor people were worshiping the invaders who almost killed them as gods. Especially the extremely devout power of faith, it was definitely enough to create a powerful god. The Dalent civilization had killed countless gods and understood the advantages and disadvantages of the belief system very well. They could also use the power of faith to make some weapons and props. Therefore, after confirming that the survivors could really provide an endless supply of power of faith, some people who were originally skeptical immediately took a 180-degree turn. Those poor survivors did not know that they and their descendants would no longer have a future. Their only value was like livestock in a cage, continuously contributing everything they had to their owners. Sir Commander, I need to remind you that this is a little against the rules. The leader of the shapeshifters lowered his voice and cautiously reminded. Rules? Oof. The boy laughed disdainfully. Tell me, what are the rules? Those old fogies in the council? They're just taking advantage of being born earlier than all of us. Otherwise, how could they obtain a huge amount of resources to maintain their long lives? But the problem is, if you go against their wishes, it is likely to cause a lot of unnecessary trouble. Conquering this world is already enough to make your resume shine. As for the rest, as long as you follow the prescribed order, it's only a matter of time before you obtain a seat in the parliament. You're a genius, a true genius. Not only do you have incredible talent, but you also have mature and cold wisdom. Why take the risk? A male spellcaster, who was rather old, also advised. According to the laws of the Dalent people, every expeditionary army corresponded to a world. Unless they obtained permission, expeditionary army commanders were forbidden from privately contacting each other or even helping each other, not to mention directly crossing from one world to another. This was mainly to prevent the commander of the expeditionary army, who held military power, from secretly forming a huge force that could threaten the safety of the mother, and then launching a military coup to seize the highest power. No, you don't understand. Power is worthless to me. What I'm after is something you'll never understand. All right, cut the crap and get out of the way. I'm going to clean up the energy storm that's blocking the teleportation. After saying that, the boy directly blurred his body and passed through the other party's body. He raised his hands high and began to loudly chant a complicated and jerky incantation. Along with the cadence of the syllables, the passage that was filled with mania and chaos gradually became clear. When the constantly raging energy storm completely disappeared, he did not stop for even a second and directly passed through. Looking at the dark blue light emitted from the huge teleportation door, the leader of the shapeshifters smiled bitterly and asked the male spellcaster beside him, "What do you think we should do next? Continue to follow Sir Commander unswervingly, or secretly restore the connection with the mother planet?" "I don't know. If we continue to follow him, we'll become traitors in the eyes of the mother planet, or rather, traitors. This is not a good thing. Even if we're not punished in the end, we'll be suppressed and even exiled in disguise. But if we betray him, I can guarantee that no matter where you escape to, there's no way to guarantee that you'll be able to escape the revenge." The male Dalent spellcaster gave his own analysis rather helplessly. "So, we're now caught in the middle. Either we give it our all, or we don't put in any effort and wait for the mother planet to notice that something is wrong and then think of a way to clear our suspicions." The leader of the shapeshifters probed meaningfully. Shapeshifters were never a race that liked to be content with their lot. On the contrary, they were born adventurers and speculators, eager to seize every opportunity to climb up. The male spellcaster obviously knew what the other party was thinking. He asked with a faint smile, "Do you think this is an opportunity? Don't forget, we're not the honorable Sir Commander who has the talent and bloodline that the entire civilization is envious of. So even if he makes a big mistake, he doesn't have to worry about his life being in danger. At most, he'll be under house arrest on the mother planet and try his best to reproduce some mixed-blood descendants so that his excellent bloodline can be passed down among the Dalent people. Failure means death. I've always been very clear about this point. But don't forget that our Sir Commander is an eclectic person who has great strength and excellent leadership skills. He's only a little over 12 years old. Can you imagine what he'll become in 10, 20, or 30 years? My friend, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Only now do we have the opportunity to follow a great leader who may reach the peak of power. The shapeshifter's leader's tone was full of provocation. Damn it, I need some time to think about it. Before that, let's let the army pass through the portal. At the same time, let's see why Sir Commander is so concerned about a barren planet that has almost lost all its resources. The male spellcaster was obviously more cautious than the other party and decisively changed the topic. From his point of view, rather than making a decision too early, it was better to observe for a while and wait for the situation to become clear before choosing a side. This was the smart way to do things. After all, he was a spellcaster and belonged to the privileged class in the society built by the Dalent people. There was no need to gamble his future and fate. Soon, under the command of various officers, more than 2/3 of the expeditionary army passed through the portal and embarked on a new journey.